Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. 5 years at Money's Flat had changed me in ways I never expected. When I first left my marketing job in Portland, my colleagues thought I was having a midlife crisis. Trading a corner office for a ranger station seemed like career suicide to them. But after years of PowerPoint presentations and client meetings that left me feeling hollow inside, I needed something real. My name is Sarah Dane, and I used to spend my days analyzing market trends and crafting advertising campaigns. Now I spend them tracking wildlife patterns and making sure hikers don't get themselves killed. The pay cut was substantial, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. At least that's what I thought before everything changed. Money's Flat isn't the kind of place you'd find in a tourism brochure. It's a 50.0-acre stretch of old-growth forest in western Oregon, far enough from Portland that we rarely get day trippers. The preserve sits in a natural bowl formed by ancient volcanic activity, surrounded by ridges that trap fog and create their own weather patterns. Most days the mist doesn't burn off until noon, if at all. Our ranger station is a weathered structure that has been standing since the 1960s with cedar siding and a metal roof that pings in the rain. The interior still has the original wood paneling, now faded to a warm honey color. Maps cover the walls, their corners curling from humidity, and our most vital piece of equipment, the coffee maker, runs almost constantly. We operate with a minimal crew, myself, 2 other full-time rangers, and a seasonal helper during the summer months. Mark Reeves handles the eastern sector, Linda Chin takes the west, and I oversee the central area, including the main camping zones. Our seasonal helper, Joey Martinez, mostly assists with trail maintenance and visitor center duties. The visitors we do get tend to be serious outdoor enthusiasts, backpackers, wildlife photographers, and local hunters during season. We also have our regulars, like Patrick Morgan. Patrick was what old-timers called a mountain man, though he lived in town and worked as a high school science teacher. He spent nearly every weekend at his favorite campsite deep in the preserve, where he studied local flora and documented wildlife behavior. That's what made his last radio call so disturbing. It was a Thursday night in late October, and I was stuck at the station finishing overdue paperwork. Budget reports never got easier, even after 5 years. The rain had started around sunset, a steady Oregon drizzle that drummed against the metal roof and windows. My coffee had gone cold, but I was too lazy to make a fresh pot. The other rangers had left hours ago. Mark had a daughter's soccer game to attend, and Linda wasn't scheduled for the evening shift. The station felt different at night. Every creak of the old building seemed amplified, every shadow deeper. I was just about to call it quits when the radio crackled to life. The static was harsh in the quiet room, making me jump. Then Patrick's voice came through, broken and urgent. "Ranger emergency, campsite, something's wrong." The transmission was weak, but I knew Patrick's voice. In 5 years, I'd never heard him sound scared. Concerned, yes. We had forest fires threatening the preserve or when he found evidence of poachers, but never scared. I reached for the radio. "Patrick, this is Dane." "Say again, what's your situation?" More static then. "Not natural." Jesus Christ, The transmission cut out. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, first aid kit, radio, GPS unit, and rain gear. The station's rifle was out for maintenance. Budget cuts meant we shared one between 3 rangers, rotating it for our patrols. I did have a flare gun, standard issue for signaling in emergencies. My Jeep, a battered Forest Service vehicle with more dents than paint, started on the second try. The headlights cut through the rain as I navigated the narrow service road that led to Patrick's usual camping spot. He preferred a remote area near Copper Creek, about 4 miles from the main campground. The spot required special permits because of its isolation, but Patrick had been camping there so long that we essentially grandfathered him in. The rain intensified as I drove, forcing me to slow down on the muddy road. Branches whipped against the Jeep's sides, and twice I had to stop to move fallen limbs out of the way. The whole time I kept trying to reach Patrick on the radio, but got nothing but static in return. It took 23 minutes to reach Patrick's campsite. I know because I kept checking my watch, watching the minutes tick by as the knot in my stomach grew tighter. His red Ford pickup was the first thing my headlights caught. The driver's side door was open, interior lights still on, casting a weak glow in the rain. Patrick's tent was about 30 yards from his truck, or what was left of it. The round fly was shredded, hanging in strips like someone had taken a knife to it. But looking closer, I could see that the tears were ragged, not clean cuts. The tent poles were bent at unnatural angles. The aluminum tubes twisted like they'd been mangled by something with enormous strength. "Patrick," I called out, my voice seemingly swallowed by the rain. "Patrick, it's Ranger Dane." The only response was the steady drumming of rain on leaves and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I swiped my flashlight beam across the campsite, noting details with the methodical approach my training had drilled into me. Patrick's camp stove was overturned, his cooking gear scattered. A half-eaten meal sat on his camp table, the food now cold and sodden. That's when I heard a sound that didn't belong in these woods. It was like a whine, but deeper, more mechanical. Almost like the sound a diesel engine makes when it's struggling to turn over. But there was something organic about it too, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The beam of my flashlight caught movement at the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was just rain-heavy branches swaying in the wind. Then I saw Patrick. He was partially concealed by a thick patch of sallow bushes, but I could see enough. His body was contorted, limbs bent at impossible angles. The rain had washed some of the blood away, but I could still see where something had fed. The wounds weren't clean like an animal kill. They were savage, almost experimental, like whatever had done this was curious about human anatomy. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Dane. We have a situation. Patrick Morgan is dead. Something's out here." The reply was immediate, but broken. "Repeat. Dane, what do you mean something?" Before I could respond, I heard the whine again. Closer this time, much closer. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the rain, and saw it. The creature was massive, easily the size of a bull elk, but built all wrong. Its body was lean, almost emaciated, with limbs that seemed too long and jointed in places that didn't make sense. The fur, if you could call it that, was patchy and matted, looking more like wet feathers than mammalian hair. But it was the head that stopped my breath, ranked on a long serpentine neck. It looked like someone had tried to combine a wolf skull with reptile features. The skin was pulled tight over the bone structure, creating hollows and ridges that shouldn't exist in nature. Its eyes caught my flashlight beam and reflected it back wrongly. Not the usual eyeshine of nocturnal animals, but something deeper, more aware. I stood there, frozen, as the creature studied me. Its head swayed slightly, like a snake sizing up its prey, and a whining sound emanated from somewhere deep in its throat. The rain seemed to roll off its skin in strange ways, like water on oil. My hand found the flare gun in its holster. It was the only weapon I had, and I knew it wouldn't do much damage, but maybe the light and noise would scare it off. Most predators, even aggressive ones, will retreat from sudden bright lights and loud sounds. The creature took a step forward, its movement unnaturally fluid. Each limb moved independently, yet somehow in perfect coordination, like watching 4 separate predators working as one. Its head lowered, bringing it level with my chest, and I could see rows of teeth that didn't match any predator I knew. They're arranged almost like a shark's, but with some curved backward like hooks. I didn't consciously decide to fire the flare. My body acted on pure survival instinct. The gun kicked in my hand and the red flare illuminated the clearing like daylight. For a split second I saw the creature in perfect detail, and I wish I hadn't. Its face wasn't just wrong, it was impossible. The features seemed to shift and change in the red lights, like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. What I had thought were patches of fur or feathers were actually areas where the skin had grown over itself in layers, creating a natural armor. The flare caught it in the shoulder, and the creature recoiled with that mechanical whine rising to a shriek that made my teeth vibrate. It backed away from the light, its movements becoming jerky and erratic, but it didn't flee. Instead, it began circling the clearing, staying just outside the remaining light from my flashlight. I could hear it moving through the underbrush, branches snapping under its weight. The whining had changed pitch, becoming more rhythmic, almost like speech, but not quite. Sometimes it seemed to come from one direction, then suddenly from another, as if the creature was trying to confuse me. I backed toward my Jeep, keeping the flashlight beam moving, trying to track the sound. The rain had intensified, making it harder to see and hear. Water ran into my eyes, and every time I blinked, I imagined the creature rushing me from the darkness. Finally, my back hit the Jeep's door. I fumbled it open with one hand, never taking my eyes off the tree line. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught one last glimpse of the creature. It had emerged partially from the shadows, its head extended on that impossible neck, watching me with eyes that held too much intelligence. I started the engine and threw the Jeep into reverse, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. As I turned the vehicle around, my headlights swept across the clearing one last time. The creature was gone, but I could still hear that whining sound, now fading as it moved deeper into the forest. I radioed dispatch again once I was back on the main road, forcing myself to give a clear and detailed report. They sent state police and emergency services, but by the time they arrived, I had already thrown up twice in the station's bathroom. The investigation lasted through the night and into the next morning. They found everything exactly as I described. Patrick's body, the destroyed campsite, and the strange claw marks of the trees. The marks were what bothered the wildlife experts most. They didn't match any known predator, and their pattern suggested whatever made them had fingers rather than paws. The official investigation tried to blame it on a bear or mountain lion, but the evidence didn't fit. Bears don't drag their kills into the open, mountain lions don't leave claw marks 7 feet up a tree trunk, and neither of them leave tracks like the ones they found. Wide splayed prints that seemed to change shape between impressions as if the creature's feet were somehow fluid. DNA samples from the saliva found on Patrick's body came back inconclusive. The lab report used phrases like sample contamination and testing error, but I saw the technician's face when she was collecting the samples. She'd never seen anything like it. The preserve stayed closed for 2 weeks while they conducted a comprehensive wildlife survey. They brought in experts from 3 universities and even flew in a specialist from the Smithsonian. They set up camera traps and collected hundreds of samples, but they never found what killed Patrick. When we reopened, there were new rules: no solo camping, no hiking after dusk. Regular patrols had to be done in pairs. We told visitors it was because of aggressive bear activity, but the locals knew better. They'd heard the stories, seen the fear in our eyes when we talked about that night. I kept working at Liddy's flat. Someone had to, and I couldn't leave knowing that thing was still out there. But I changed my habits. I carried a rifle now, my own, since I couldn't rely on the station's equipment. I installed better lights around the station and my cabin, and I started keeping a journal of strange sounds and unexplained tracks. The theory is still out there. I hear it sometimes late at night when the rain is falling and the fog rolls in thick. That mechanical whine drifting through the trees, all is just far enough away that I can pretend it's something normal, something natural. But I know better now. I know that there are things in these woods that science can't explain. Things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes on the darkest nights I catch glimpses of movement in the trees. Fluid, impossible movement that shouldn't exist in nature. Patrick's death was officially ruled an animal attack, caused undetermined. His family accepted it because they had to, because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. But I knew what I saw that night, and I knew it's still out there, watching, waiting. These woods aren't as peaceful as I thought they'd be, but they stay because someone has to know the truth. Someone has to remember what really happened that night at Mooney's flat, and what still lurks in the shadows of these ancient trees. It started the way most days do for me, with a steaming cup of black coffee in the rickety ranger station, staring out the window at the dense thicket of pines that surrounded Elmwood Reserve. The station was a small, weather-beaten shack nestled on the edge of this sprawling forest, miles from the nearest town. I've worked here for over 5 years now, and I've always appreciated the quiet. Name's Paul Donner, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the type to gravitate towards solitude. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops into the pot as I reviewed the morning reports. Standard procedure: check weather conditions, review any overnight incident reports, and monitor the radio for updates from other stations. The forecast showed a cold front moving in, typical for early October in these parts. Temperature would drop to the mid-30s by nightfall. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, nothing special. Got out of there as soon as I could, and after a stint in the military, 8 years on the Army Corps of Engineers, I found myself drawn to Park Service work. It's a job that lets me stay out of people's way, which suits me just fine. The skills transferred well: land navigation, emergency response, maintaining equipment. Different context, same principles. Elmwood is no national treasure like Yellowstone or Yosemite. It's quiet, rarely sees visitors, and most of the wildlife here is your standard fare. Deer, rabbits, the occasional black bear, though I haven't spotted one in years. You get the usual problems: lost hikers, illegal campfires, kids drinking where they shouldn't. Nothing that can't be handled with a stern warning and an escort back to the main road. The reserve spans about 50,000 acres of mixed hardwood forest, with elevation ranging from 1,200. Most visitors stick to the marked trails near the entrance, the ones maintained by our small maintenance crew. The deeper areas, especially around the northern boundary where Bitter Falls is located, rarely see human traffic. The terrain gets rougher there, the trails less defined. Even experienced hikers tend to avoid it. I was halfway through my second cup when the radio crackled. Static at first, then Brent's voice cut through. Brent Marshall had been working these woods almost as long as I had. Former search and rescue worker from Montana who moved east for family reasons. He wasn't the type to call unless something needed attention. "Paul, you hear about that missing couple?" His voice crackled with static. I set down my coffee, already reaching for my notepad. Missing couple. News to me. Yeah, Mark and Sarah Reeves, both experienced hikers according to their family. At least in their early 30s. They were supposed to check in at the South Station 2 days ago, never showed. Sheriff's been getting calls. I jotted down the names, checking the calendar. 2 days missing put that disappearance around Tuesday. We'd had clear weather then, temperatures in the mid-50s, survivable conditions for prepared hikers. Any idea where they were headed? Yeah, somewhere near Bitter Falls. You know that part of the reserve? I knew it well. Bitter Falls wasn't exactly a popular spot. It was deep in the woods, about a 3-hour hike from the nearest trailhead, and the path to get there was overgrown, almost forgotten. The falls themselves dropped about 60 feet over a series of granite ledges, emptying into a deep pool surrounded by old-growth hemlocks. beautiful spot but isolated. Locals had stories about it, like they do about any remote place in the woods. Tales of hikers going missing, strange sounds at night, animals acting peculiar. I've always written them off as campfire stories, the kind every small town has, but something about that area had always felt wrong. The air seemed thicker there, the shadows deeper. I learned to trust my instincts over the years, and they told me to keep my distance when possible. "You'll check it out," I told Brent, already reaching for my gear. Standard search and rescue kit. First aid supplies, emergency blankets, GPS unit, extra batteries, water, high-energy food. But if this is another case of hikers getting lost, they're in for a cold night. "Thanks, Paul. Be careful out there." I grabbed my rifle too, a Remington 700 then. Not standard issue for park rangers, but the Army taught me to be prepared, and the reserve had its share of potentially dangerous wildlife. Black bears, mostly. Though we had unconfirmed reports of mountain lions in recent years, better to have it and not need it. The hike out to Bitter Falls started routinely enough. I took the main service road for the first 2 miles, then cut north on Trail 287. The path was overgrown but still visible, marked occasionally by old blazes on the trees. The morning was quiet, save for the usual forest sounds, wind in the canopy, birds calling, and the occasional snap of a branch under my boots. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way the birds went quiet as I got deeper into the woods, or how the undergrowth seemed more trampled than usual. The air felt heavy, like just before a storm, though the sky remained clear. The temperature had dropped several degrees despite the morning sun. About 2 miles from the falls, I started noticing signs that something was wrong. The damage to the vegetation was too extensive for normal wildlife activity. Broken branches hung at odd angles, some as high as 8 feet off the ground. There were places where the leaf litter had been scraped away, exposing bare earth beneath. And there were tracks. I knelt down to examine them, pulling out my phone to take photos. They were unlike anything I had seen in 2 decades of outdoor work, too large for a black bear, which typically leave prints about 5 inches wide. These were nearly twice that size. The pad marks were wrong too, more canine than ursine, but massively out of scale. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were wolf tracks. But there hadn't been wolves in these parts for nearly a century. The tracks led toward the falls, so I followed, moving more cautiously now. The rifle had made its way from my shoulder to my hands. Every few yards I'd stop, listen, scan the woods around me. The silence had become absolute. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. Just the growing sound of rushing water as I approached the falls. The clearing around Bitter Falls came into view through the trees. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. The morning sun caught the spray from the falls, creating a rainbow effect above the pool. But the scene before me killed any appreciation for natural beauty. Our tent lay collapsed near the trade line, its heavy-duty nylon torn to shreds. This wasn't animal damage. I had seen plenty of bears raid campsites, and this was different. The tears were too precise, almost surgical in places. The camping equipment was scattered across the clearing, sleeping bags shredded, backpacks emptied, cooking equipment crushed as if it had been thrown against rocks. But it was the blood that drew my attention. Dark stains soaked into the earth around what remained of the tent, already turning brown. Too much blood. No one could survive that kind of blood loss. I pulled out my radio. "Brent, you there?" Static. "Brent, do you copy?" Nothing but white noise. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual this deep in the reserve, but inconvenient timing. That's when I noticed the drag marks leading away from the campsite, accompanied by another set of those massive tracks. They led deeper into the woods, away from the falls. Every instinct told me to wait for backup. Standard procedure for finding a potential crime scene is to secure the perimeter and wait for law enforcement. And if there was any chance the Reeves were still alive, I followed the trail, moving as quietly as possible. Years of hunting and military training kicked in. Heel-to-toe steps, constant scanning using available cover. The drag marks continued for about half a mile, leading to a natural clearing formed by several fallen trees. That's where I found it. The creature was hunched over something on the ground. Its back was to me. Even hunched, it stood larger than any bear I'd ever seen. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur, but its proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, more like those of a massive wolf or big cat. But the musculature was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Its shoulders were massive, humped like a hyena's, but far larger. I raised the rifle slowly, trying to control my breathing. The creature's head snapped up and I saw what it had been feeding on. Human remains, fresh ones. It turned to face me, my finger tightened on the trigger. Its face was a nightmare mixture of wolf and something else, something older. The snout was too long, the jaw too wide, filled with teeth that looked more like broken glass than anything natural. Its eyes were the worst part, yellow, intelligent, aware in a way no animal's eyes should be. I fired. The Type 3008 round caught it in the shoulder, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The creature screamed, not a howl or roar, but a sound that set my teeth on edge, like metal grinding against bone. Blood mounted its fur where the bullet struck, but it didn't go down. Instead, it moved fast, faster than anything that size had any right to move. It cleared the fallen trees in a single bound and disappeared into the forest. I fired twice more, but the shots went wide. My hands were shaking as I reloaded. The years of training kept the movement smooth. The clearing was silent again, save for the pounding of my heart. I approached what remained of the reefs carefully, rifle ready. The scene confirmed my worst fears. The remains were fresh, probably less than 24 hours old. The creature had been thorough. What was left wouldn't have filled a grocery bag. I took photos, documenting everything as best I could, while trying to keep my breakfast down. It took almost an hour before I got radio contact again. Brent, it's Paul. We got a situation out here. I found them. Or what's left of them. There was a long pause before Brent responded. Are you sure? Positive. And there's something else out here, something that... I stopped, unsure how to continue. How do you describe something that shouldn't exist? Just get the sheriff. Meet back up and bring rifles. Big ones. I waited there until help arrived, keeping watch over the scene. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me spin around, expecting to see that twisted face emerging from the shadows. But the creature didn't return. The sheriff arrived with Brent and 2 deputies about an hour later. They were experienced outdoor law enforcement, used to dealing with everything from lost hikers to drug operations. But I watched their faces as they took in the scene. They knew this was different. We followed the blood trail and tracks for another mile, but they eventually disappeared near a rocky outcropping. The forensics team arrived later that afternoon. They photographed everything, collected samples, measured tracks. The official report would later cite an unknown predator, possibly an escaped exotic animal. They closed that section of the reserve indefinitely, citing ongoing safety concerns. The local paper ran a story about a tragic hiking accident, suggesting the couple had been attacked by a bear. The families were told the same, but I know what I saw. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the station, I can still hear that scream echoing through the trees. I still patrol the reserve. It's my job. After all, but I carry extra ammunition now, and I never go near Bitter Falls after sunset. The thing that bothers me most, those tracks we found, They weren't the only set in the area. There were older ones, partially eroded by rain and wind, scattered throughout that part of the reserve. Whatever I encountered that day, it's been here longer than we have. And I'm certain it's still out there, waiting in the deeper woods where the shadows never quite lift. Watching and hunting. We keep the reserve open. I camp and hunt here, but now when visitors ask about Bitter Falls, I direct them to other trails, safer trails. And if they press the issue, I tell them the area is closed for ecological studies. Most accept this without question. A few don't. They talk about taking the old trails anyway, about seeing the falls for themselves. I look them in the eye and tell them about the dangerous terrain, the lack of cell service, the distance from any help. Usually that's enough to discourage them, because I know the truth. Sometimes the old stories, the ones whispered around campfires, about things lurking in the deep woods aren't just stories. Sometimes they're warnings. And in places like Bitter Falls, where the shadows grow a little darker, and the silence runs a little deeper, those warnings should be heeded. I still drink my coffee at the ranger station every morning, still watch the sunrise over the pines. And now I pay more attention to the shadows between the trees, to the way the birds suddenly go quiet, to the tracks left in the soft earth after rain, because I know that somewhere out there, in the depths of Elmwood Reserve, something is watching. Something that's been here far longer than any of us. Something that's waiting. And sometimes on particularly quiet nights, I hear that scream again, echoing from the direction of Bitter Falls. When that happens, I make sure all the doors are locked, check my rifle, and wait for dawn. Because in this job, I've learned one absolute truth. The dead woods keep their secrets, and some of those secrets have teeth. The first time I ever heard the name Trapper's Gulch, I was sitting in my tiny kitchen eating breakfast at 5 o'clock a.m. before heading out to work. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten as I scrolled through the overnight incident reports on my tablet. Most were routine, drunk campers being rowdy, an unattended campfire, and teenagers sneaking onto closed trails. The one report caught my eye. A distress call from somewhere deep in the Klamath Mountains, in a remote area I'd never paid much attention to before, and crumb barns, and I'd been a park ranger for over a decade. The job sounds romantic to outsiders, protecting nature, helping lost hikers, watching sunsets from fire towers, but the reality involves a lot more paperwork, minor medical emergencies, and telling people not to feed the wildlife. But I love it. The forest has been my home since I was 23, and I thought I knew every inch of my territory. Until that morning in late September 2023, when the distress call had come from two experienced backpackers, Martin Chen and David Rodriguez. They'd gone off trail against regulations, but it happens, and ended up in an area they called Trapper's Gulch. The name wasn't on any of our official maps. According to the overnight ranger's notes, the hikers had been distressed and disoriented when they finally made it to the ranger station at 3 a.m. I took another sip of my coffee, grimacing at the coldness, and read further. The hikers reported hearing unusual sounds and finding disturbing signs of large animal activity. Typically, when visitors say things like that, it means they've spooked themselves over a perfectly normal deer or elk, but something about their description nagged at me. They mentioned a rhythmic thudding that followed them for several miles, and tracks that seemed to appear and disappear at random. The overnight ranger had logged it as a potential mountain lion sighting, but that didn't fit. Mountain lions are stealthy, they don't announce themselves with rhythmic sounds. Bears will sometimes follow hikers, but they're not exactly subtle about it. This was different. I finished my breakfast and headed to the station, arriving just before sunrise. There was a distinct autumn chill that meant winter wasn't far off. Inside, I found the overnight ranger Pat Winters looking more haggard than usual. Quan Pat nodded, gathering their things to head home. Was hikers from last night. Never seen anyone that scared. Chen's an emergency room doctor, and Rodriguez is a geology professor. Not exactly the type to spook easily. They still here? Platt shook their head. A few hours ago, they gave detailed statements and they hesitated, pulling out their phone. I took some photos. Most are too blurry to make anything out. But this one, the photo showed a section of forest floor dimly lit by what looked like a flashlight. What caught my attention wasn't the obvious sign of something large having passed through, the broken branches and disturbed earth, but the pattern left behind. These are the same things, if you could call them that. Didn't match anything I'd seen in 15 years. Wildlife management. I'm heading out there, I decided, already reaching for my gear. Where exactly did they say this gulch was? I'd pulled up a map on their computer. They marked it here, about 6 miles northeast of the old mining road. But Quinn, they looked at me seriously. Take back up. I should have listened to them. There's one thing about horror stories. When you live in one, you don't realize it until it's too late. You make all the classic mistakes. Not because you're stupid, because your brain refuses to accept that something truly abnormal is happening. I radioed Jamie Walsh, another ranger, who was supposed to be patrolling the eastern sector that morning. Hey Jamie, want to check out a possible wildlife situation with me? The radio crackled. Cut today. There are reports of illegal camping sites I need to clear out. Everything okay? Yeah, just a routine check. You'll handle it. Another mistake. I gathered my usual gear. Fast aid kit, radio, GPS unit, camera, bear spray, and my sidearm. Standard procedure is to document everything. So I grabbed one of our incident report tablets too. The drive to the old mining road took about 40 minutes. The ranger truck bouncing over increasingly rough terrain. The road itself had been closed to public vehicles for years. We kept it partially maintained for emergency access. The morning fog still clung to the trees as I parked and started hiking northeast. The forest was old growth here, massive Douglas firs and red cedars creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The usual morning sounds surrounded me. Birds calling, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant sound of running water. Everything seemed normal until it didn't. The change was subtle at first. The bird sounds grew fewer, then stopped entirely. The temperature seemed to drop, though that might have been my imagination. The trees grew closer together, their branches creating deep shadows, even in the morning light. After about an hour of hiking, I found the first clear sign that something was wrong. A massive cedar, easily hundreds of years old, had deep gouges in its trunk. Not bear marks, I'd seen plenty of those. These were different, almost geometric in their precision, forming patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. I photographed the marks and took measurements, doing everything in the incident report. Professional habits die hard, even when your hands are shaking slightly as you type. The air had grown strangely still. No wind, no distant sounds, just the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves and branches. I checked my GPS. I should be approaching the area Chen and Rodriguez had marked as Trapper's Gulch. That's when I heard it, the thudding. It was exactly as they described, a rhythmic sound, like something heavy being dropped or struck against the ground. But there was a pattern to it, almost like a language. 3 quick thuds followed by 2 slower ones, then a pause. Repeat. I pulled out my camera and started recording, speaking quietly into the microphone. September 28th, 2023. Approximately 0900 hours. Investigating unusual sounds reported by hikers in an unofficial area known as Trapper's Gulch. The sound appears to be... I stop, The thudding had changed. It was closer now and the pattern was different. Faster, more urgent. Then I found the first body part. It was a boot, just a hiking boot, partially hidden under some ferns, but it wasn't empty. My training kicked in. I took photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and radioed for backup. No response, just static. I checked my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the forest. The thudding had stopped. I looked up from the boot, and that's when I saw it, the clearing ahead, a fallen tree. Even from this distance, I could tell it was wrong. The shape was too broken, too scattered. As I approached, the smell hit me. Copper and rot, the unmistakable stench of death. The body, what remained of it, lay spread across about 10 feet of forest floor. It looked like something had not just killed this person, but had systematically taken them apart. I forced myself to be professional. More photos, more notes. The victim appears to be a male, probably in his 30s. Multiple traumatic injuries consistent with what? No animal I knew could do this kind of damage with such precision. I found a wallet about 20 feet from the main scene. Brandon Wilcox, according to his driver's license. Age 34, local address. He'd been reported missing 3 days ago, according to the alert on my tablet. The clearing started again, closer this time, much closer. I switched off my flashlight, trying to control my breathing. The clearing had grown darker, though it was barely noon. Something moved in the trees to my left, something big. Here's what I saw, though. My mind still tries to reject it. It moved on what appeared to be multiple limbs, but they didn't bend the way limbs should. Its body seemed to shift and change in reflection in disturbed water. It was dark, but not black, more like the absence of color itself. The creature stepped into the clearing. It had to be at least 9 feet tall, but its proportions were all wrong. Multiple limbs, yes, but they seemed to appear and disappear as it moved. Its head, if you could call it that, was elongated with no clear features except for what might have been eyes. But the eyes, they were wrong. It reflected no light. And then it saw me. I know it saw me because in that moment, I felt something I'd never experienced before and haven't since. The sensation of something alien trying to understand what it was seeing, not with curiosity, but with a kind of hungry intelligence that made my soul want to shrivel up and hide. I'd like to say I acted heroically, that I stood my ground, drew my weapon, and shot down the forest and its visitors like I was trained to do. Instead, I ran. The thing pursued me. I could hear it moving through the trees, that rhythmic thudding, now a constant beat that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Branches snapped behind me. Something hot and wet hit my neck. Blood? Saliva? I didn't stop to check. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Somehow I made it back to my truck. On the first try, thank God. And I reversed down the old mining road so fast I was surprised I didn't flip the vehicle. Only when I reached the main road did I stop, pulling over to vomit into the grass. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My neck was wet. But when I checked in the mirror, there was nothing there. The rest of that day is a blur of police reports, search parties, and endless questions. They found Brandon Wilcox remains exactly where I left them. But there was no sign of the creature. No tracks, no blood, no evidence of anything unusual, except for the condition of the body. The official report calls it an animal attack, probably a bear. Chen and Rodriguez's report was filed away as a case of hikers, spooked by normal forest sounds. My own account was edited. The official version mentions finding the body and calls for backup. Nothing about the creature. The impossible movements, the feeling of being studied by something that shouldn't exist. But here's what I know. Something lives in Trapper's Gulch. Something that doesn't belong in our world. Something that watches and waits, and occasionally hunts. I've been a ranger for over 10 years now, and I still work in the same forest, but I never go back to that part of the woods. And when hikers ask about Trapper's Gulch, I tell them there's nothing out there worth seeing. Just trees and shadows and the usual forest sounds. Sometimes I lie awake at night, remembering the way that thing moved, the impossible angles of its body, the feeling of being seen by something that shouldn't exist. And I wonder, did it let me go? And if it did, why? The forest holds many secrets. Some of them, I've learned, are better left undisturbed, but I still hear it sometimes in my dreams. That rhythmic thudding. 3 quick beats, 2 slow ones, then silence. Thud, 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 thud. Waiting. 10 a.m. and morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of Kettuckton Mountain Park, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. I pulled into my usual parking spot at the ranger station, the gravel crunching under my truck's tires. The air was crisp for late October, and a light mist still clung to the treetops. For another day in paradise, I thought. Though paradise might not be what most people would use for this forgotten corner of Maryland. My name's Everett Nason, and I've been a ranger here for just over 5 years. It's the kind of place most people only know as a vague reference point near Camp David, if they know it at all. The solitude suits me fine. Growing up in a small town nearby, the kind with more churches than people, taught me to appreciate quiet. My father was a carpenter, hands always rough with sawdust and calluses, and my mother devoted herself to homeschooling my sisters and me while tending to her prized garden. They never quite understood why I chose this path instead of taking over Dad's business. I grabbed my gear from the truck: radio, first aid kit, GPS unit, and the usual supplies. Jenkins, the morning shift supervisor, was already at his desk when I walked in. Got a fallen tree report on Trail 4, he said without looking up from his computer. About 5 miles in. Need you to check it out. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Any other reports? Quiet as a church mouse. Weather's keeping the tourists away. 10:30 a.m. The trail stretched before me, like a worn ribbon through the woods. The trees here are old, their trunks thick and gnarled with age. Some have been here longer than the United States has been a country. White oaks, red maples, and towering pines create a cathedral ceiling overhead, their branches intertwining like clasped hands. I've always found peace in these woods. There's a simplicity here that people don't understand. Every sound has meaning: the rap of a woodpecker, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the soft patting of deer hooves on fallen leaves. It's a language you learn to speak if you listen long enough. 11:15 a.m. The first signs of something wrong were subtle. A cluster of crows took flight suddenly, their harsh calls echoing through the trees. Unusual for this time of day, but not unprecedented. Still, years of working in these woods have taught me to notice such things. I made a mental note and continued on, my boots crunching softly on the leaf-strewn path. The fallen tree was about where Jenkins said it would be, a massive oak, its roots torn from the earth like God himself had yanked it up. The root ball alone was taller than me, soil still clinging to the twisted mass of wooden fingers. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos for the maintenance crew. That's when I caught the first whiff of it at 12 p.m. Anyone who works in nature knows the smell of death. It's part of the job. Finding deer carcasses, smaller animals that didn't make it through winter, the occasional unfortunate hiker who ventured too far off trail. But this was different. The stench hit me like a physical force, making my eyes water and my stomach churn. I pulled my radio from my belt. Days, this is Nason. You copy? Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing but white noise. Cell service was spotty out here on the best days, and today my phone showed 0 bars. I was on my own. The smart thing would have been to head back, report the smell, and return with backup. That's protocol, but something about it nagged at me. The intensity was wrong. The wrongness of it pulled at some primitive part of my brain, the part that knows there's a predator nearby, to actually see it. 12:30. I followed the smell, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. The air felt heavy, like just before a thunderstorm. The first body was partially hidden under a fallen log. At first I thought it was a trick of light and shadow, my mind making patterns out of nothing. Then I saw the hand, pale and waxy, fingers curled like dead spiders. The rest of him was worse, much worse. I've seen my share of animal attacks. Bears can do terrible damage to a human body, but this wasn't that. The man's limbs were twisted in ways that defied anatomy. Like something had played with him like a child's doll. His face was a mess of deep gouges. His eyes were intact, wide open, frozen in an expression of pure terror. The second body was 20 feet away, a woman probably in her 30s, though it was hard to tell. Her torso had been open. That's the only word I could think of that doesn't make me want to vomit. Her ribcage was exposed, splayed outward like some grotesque flower. Her internal organs were scattered around her body, some partially consumed. I was reaching for my radio again, though I knew it was useless when I heard it. A sound like something heavy dragging through the underbrush, deliberate and slow. My hand dropped to my knife, standard issue, good for cutting rope and not much else. I turned slowly, every muscle tensed. It emerged from behind a massive oak tree, and my mind rebelled at what I was seeing. The creature moved like a nightmare, given flesh, its proportions all wrong. The body was long and lean, covered in patchy fur that might once have been black, but now looked diseased. Its lungs were the worst parts. Too long, too jointed, ending in curved claws that left deep gouges in the earth with each step. But its face, God, its face. The wolf's muzzle stretched too wide, filled with teeth that didn't match, some sharp and serrated, others flat and square, all crammed together like a mouthful of broken glass. The skin around its jaws was pulled back in a permanent snarl, exposing blackened gums and more teeth than should be possible. 1:15 p.m. They say that in moments of extreme stress, time slows down. That's not true. Time doesn't slow down. Your brain just starts recording everything in perfect, horrible detail. I remember every second of what happened next. The creature studied me with eyes that held too much intelligence. It looked like a sickly yellow color with vertical pupils like a cat's. It cocked its head to one side, almost curious, and took a step forward. That's when my body finally caught up with my brain, and I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail in favor of a straight line toward the ranger station. Behind me, I heard the thing moving, not running, but keeping pace with an easy, loping gait that somehow made it worse. The station was moving with me. 1:30 p.m., my lungs were burning and my legs felt like lead. I knew the station was close, maybe half a mile, but it might as well have been 100 miles. The thing behind me was getting closer. I could smell it now. That same rotting stench that had led me to the bodies. I broke through a dense patch of bushes and felt something snag my jacket. For a heart-stopping moment I thought it had caught me. I stumbled, caught myself, and kept running. The station was in sight now, a small wooden building that had never looked more beautiful. Then something hit me from behind, hard enough to drive the air from my lungs. I went down, tumbling across the forest floor. When I stopped, I was on my back, and the creature was there, its hot breath washing over my face in waves of decay. Its claws dug into my shoulders, pinning me down. Its mouth opened wider than any mouth should open. and I saw rows of teeth extending down its throat like some kind of twisted shark. In desperation, I grabbed my knife and struck upward, burying the blade in its side. The sound it made wasn't a roar or a growl, it was more like the screech of metal, a metal high-pitched and horrible. It reared back, and one of its claws caught me across the ribs, tearing through my jacket and into flesh. The pain was immediate and intense, like being branded with hot iron. Just as I was certain I was about to die, something changed. The creature's head stepped up, its ears twitched. It looked toward the station, then back at me. For a moment our eyes met. I saw something there that haunts me more than the teeth or claws, recognition, understanding. This thing wasn't just an animal. That was gone, moving with that same unnatural grace back into the forest. I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, one hand pressed against my bleeding side, waiting to see if it would return. When I finally found the strength to move, I half ran, half stumbled to the station. 10 p.m. The other rangers found me in the station, pale and shaking, still bleeding through my makeshift bandage. They called in emergency services, and while we waited, I told them everything. To their credit, they didn't dismiss my story. When they found the bodies exactly where I said they'd be, they couldn't. The official report calls it an unknown predator attack. The bodies were documented, samples were taken, and experts were consulted. No one could explain what kind of animal could or would do that kind of damage. The teeth marks didn't match any known predator. The claw patterns were inconsistent with native species. I still work at Catoctin. Some people think I'm crazy for staying, but where else would I go? Someone needs to be here to watch, to warn others if that thing comes back, because I know it's still out there. Sometimes on quiet days when the wind is right, I catch that smell again, that sweet, rotting stench. Then I know it's watching, waiting, remembering me, just as I remember it. The thing about working in nature is that it teaches you respect, not just for the beauty of it, but for its secrets. There are things in the world that we don't understand, things that lurk in the shadows of our civilized life. I've seen one of them, and now, every time I walk these trails, I carry not just my knife, but the knowledge that the line between predator and prey is thin and would like to believe. They never found the creature. They never will. Some things don't want to be found, but I know it out there in my park, in the woods. And sometimes, when I'm locking up the station at night, I swear I can see yellow eyes, watching from between the trees. And I wonder if next time you won't let me go. 3 days later, the morning after, I encounter state wildlife officials descended on Catoctin like locusts. Men and women in khaki uniform tramped through my woods, taking samples, photographs, and measurements. They interviewed me 4 times each session, more detailed than the last. And you're certain it wasn't a bear? Dr. Sarah Chin, the lead wildlife biologist, asked for felt like the 100th time. We sat in the small break room of the ranger station, her notebook open before her. Bears don't have teeth like that. I said, bears don't play with their food. She made another note. The DNA samples we collected are unusual, contaminated perhaps. We're running more tests. I noticed she didn't meet my eyes, but she said this. 2 weeks later, the wounds on my side healed, leaving 3 parallel scars that looked more like surgical incisions than claw marks. The nightmares didn't fade as quickly, but something else was happening, something I couldn't explain. I started noticing patterns in the forest, dead zones where nothing grew, patches where the trees seemed to lean away from a central point. The wildlife had changed too. The deer had new migration patterns, avoiding certain areas entirely. The birds would go silent when passing over specific sections of the park. And then the disappearances started. Mark Thornton was the first inexperienced hiker who'd been coming to Catoctin for 20 years. His car was found in the parking lot, his trail registration noting a day hike on Trail 4. They found his backpack 3 days later, the fabric shredded, contents scattered. 2 weeks after that, a camping couple failed to check out. Rangers found their tent collapsed, sleeping bags still inside. No signs of struggle, just empty. I knew what was happening. So did Jenkins, though he wouldn't say it out loud. "Look at this," Sarah Chen said, spreading photographs across my desk. She'd been making weekly visits, though officially the investigation was closed. The photos showed historical records, newspaper clippings dating back to the 1800s. 1887, 3 loggers vanished near present-day park boundaries. 1923, a family of 4 disappears during a camping trip. 1956, 2 park workers report seeing a deformed wolf before quitting their jobs. 1992, similar deaths to what I'd witnessed before, ruled as a bear attack. "It's cyclic," she said. "Every 35 years, there's a cluster of incidents. Then nothing. Why hasn't anyone connected this before? Different jurisdictions, poor record keeping, changing park boundaries, and people don't want to see patterns in things they can't explain." I submitted my transfer request the next day, not to leave but to switch to night shifts. This thing was hunting in our park. I needed to understand its patterns. Sarah agreed to help, unofficially. We set up motion-activated cameras, collected soil samples, mapped the dead zones. Jenkins thought I was crazy. Maybe I was, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes, that too intelligent gaze. This wasn't just an animal, it was something else. Something that had been here long before us and would likely be here long after. It happened on a moonless night in December. The temperature had dropped below freezing and a thin layer of frost covered everything. I was checking the cameras when I caught that familiar scent. I didn't run this time, something told me that would be a mistake. Instead, I slowly turned, my hand on my new sidearm, a 244 Magnum that probably wouldn't do much good but felt reassuring nonetheless. It stood at the edge of my flashlight beam, larger than I remembered. Those yellow eyes reflected the light like mirrors. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. It did something impossible. It spoke. The sound was like gravel being crushed, barely recognizable as words. "You stay. Others go." The revelation that the creature could speak changed everything. Sarah's research took on new urgency. We found cave paintings in the deeper parts of the park, hidden beneath centuries of growth. They showed something the native tribes had known. This thing wasn't just old, it was ancient. More importantly, it was territorial. It didn't want to drive us out. It wanted to establish boundaries. The attacks happened when those boundaries were crossed. When too many people ventured too deep into its domain, spring came, and with it, a decision. The park board wanted to open new trails, facilities. Tourism was down after the disappearances, and they needed revenue. I knew what would happen if they did. I headed into the woods that night, alone. Found one of the dead zones and waited. It didn't take long. The creature emerged from the shadows, moving with that same impossible grace. This time I spoke first. "We can coexist," I said, "but there need to be rules." What followed was the strangest conversation of my life. Its speech was broken, guttural, but the intelligence behind those eyes was undeniable. We reached an understanding. Certain areas would remain closed, listed as wildlife preservation zone. It would stay within its territory. We would stay within ours. That was 5 years ago. I still work at Catoctin now as head ranger. Sarah visits occasionally, though her official investigation ended long ago. We kept our secrets, protecting both the public and the creature. The disappearances stopped. The tourists returned. Sometimes on quiet nights I hear it moving through its territory. Sometimes our paths cross during my round. We acknowledge each other with a respectful distance. The hikers and campers tell stories about strange sounds in the night, about areas of the park that feel wrong somehow. I let them talk. Stories are safer than truth. But I know that balance is fragile. Development creeps closer to the park boundaries each year. Climate change alters the landscape. How long before our careful peace is tested? And sometimes, when I look into those ancient yellow eyes, I wonder, are we the custodians of this land? Or are we just the latest in a long line of temporary residents, tolerated by something that has watched civilizations rise and fall from the shadows of these eternal woods? The knife I used that day hangs on my wall now, a reminder. The scars on my side have faded to thin white lines, but the knowledge remains. There are things in this world older and stranger than we can imagine, and sometimes the best we can do is learn to live alongside him, keeping our own territory, respecting theirs, and hoping that understanding is enough to maintain the peace. Because in the end, we're all just visitors here. Some of us just know it better than others. I've never been one for sharing personal stories, especially not this one, but I feel compelled to recount the events that unfolded a few years ago, hoping that somehow putting it all down might help me make sense of it, or at the very least, serve as a warning to others. My name is Michael, and I was a park ranger at Glacier National Park in Montana. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, where the rugged mountains meet pristine forests and crystal clear lakes. At least that's how I used to see it. Now, those same vistas are tainted with memories I'd rather forget. I had been working at the park for about 3 years when it happened. My job was pretty straightforward: patrol the trails, ensure visitor safety, and maintain the park. Natural beauty, most days were uneventful, filled with routine checks and the occasional hiker. I loved the work though. There's something profoundly satisfying about being surrounded by nature, feeling like you're part of something greater than yourself. It was early fall when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the landscape in vibrant hues of red, orange, and gold. The air had that crisp quality to it, hinting at the winter to come. We were gearing up for the end of the busy season, preparing for the quieter months ahead. I was assigned to a 3-day perimeter check with 2 other rangers, Jasper and Ayana. Jasper was a veteran, having worked in national parks for over 2 decades. He had a gruff exterior, but a heart of gold. Ayana was newer, only a year into the job, but was sharp and had a keen eye for detail. We made a good team. The perimeter check was a standard procedure, but it was no easy task. Glacier National Park covers over 1 million acres of wilderness. It's a vast expanse of dense forests, deep ravines, and rugged mountains. We were to cover the eastern boundary, a stretch that would take us through some of the most remote areas of the park. We set out early on a Tuesday morning, with backpacks loaded with supply for the 3-day trek. The first day was uneventful. We hiked through well-maintained trails, stopping occasionally to clear fallen branches or note areas that needed attention. As we walked, Jasper regaled us with stories from his years in the service. Iona peppered him with questions, eager to learn from his experience. I remember feeling content on that first day. The world seemed right. The sun was shining, the air was clean, and I was doing a job I loved with people I respected. If only I had known what was waiting for us in the depths of those woods. As the sun began to set on that first day, we made camp in a small clearing just off the main trail. Jasper got a fire going while Iona set up the tents. We ate a simple dinner of dehydrated camping meals, laughing at Jasper's exaggerated grimaces as he choked down his portion. I swear, he grumbled. These things get worse every year. What I wouldn't give for a juicy steak right about now. Iona rolled her eyes. You say that every time, old man, yet you never remember to pack anything else. I chuckled at their banter, feeling at ease despite the growing darkness around us. We took turns keeping watch through the night, more out of habit than any real concern. This was our territory, after all. What did we have to fear? The next morning we broke camp early and continued our journey. The terrain became more challenging as we moved deeper into the backcountry. The well-maintained trails gave way to overgrown paths, barely visible in some places. We had to rely on our maps and GPS more frequently, checking our position against known landmarks. It was nearing midday when we came across something unusual. In a small glade, we found a series of tracks that none of us could identify. They were large, much bigger than a bear's, and seemed to walk on 2 legs rather than 4. The impressions were deep, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. Jasper frowned as he knelt to examine the tracks more closely. In all my years, he muttered, I've never seen anything like this. Iona pulled out her camera and started taking pictures. Maybe it's a new species, she suggested, excitement coloring her voice. Wouldn't that be something? I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked at those tracks. There was something wrong about them, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Let's just note it in the log and move on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We've got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. Jasper nodded, his expression serious. Michael's right, we'll report it when we get back. For now, let's stay focused on the task at hand. We continued on, but the mood had shifted. The easy camaraderie of the morning was replaced by a tense silence. We all kept glancing around as if expecting to see something watching us from the shadows of the trees. But the forest remained still, eerily so. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. As the day wore on, the sky began to darken. At first, I thought it was just the approach of evening, but a glance at my watch showed it was only mid-afternoon. Storm clouds were rolling in, heavy and ominous. We should find a place to make camp, Jasper said, eyeing the sky. Rarely. Looks like we're in for some nasty weather. We quickened our pace, searching for a suitable spot to weather out the coming storm. That's when we stumbled upon the old logging road. The logging road was barely visible, overgrown with years of neglect, but it was clear enough that we could follow it, and I figured it would provide an escape route if we needed one. We followed the road for about a mile before finding a small clearing that would serve as our campsite. As Iona and Jasper set up the tents, I volunteered to fetch water from a nearby creek we had passed. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and I wanted to make sure we had enough water before the storm hit. I made my way down to the creek, the silence of the forest pressing in around me. The water was clear and cold, and I filled our containers quickly, eager to get back to camp. That's when I heard it, a rustling in the underbrush just on the other side of the creek. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. The rustling stopped as suddenly as it had started. I peered into the gathering gloom, trying to make out any movement, but saw nothing. After a few tense moments, I convinced myself it was probably just a deer or some other small animal. As I made my way back to camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Back at the campsite, Ayana had dinner almost ready. We ate quickly, the approaching storm lending urgency to our movements. By the time we finished, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. "And take first watch," Jasper volunteered. "You two get some rest. We might need to move quickly if this storm gets bad." Ayana and I started retreating to our respective tents as the rain began to fall in earnest. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the patter of raindrops on the tent canvas and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Despite my unease, exhaustion soon took over and I drifted into a fitful sleep. I don't know how long I slept before Jasper's shout jerked me awake. My heart was pounding as I sat up, fully alert in an instant. Years of training kicked in and I remained still, straining my ears to hear over the sound of the rain. "Ayana," Jasper called again, his voice sharp with fear. I reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. Part of me wanted to rush out there to help my friends, but another part, honed by years in the wilderness, told me to be cautious. Something wasn't right. There was another yell, more desperate this time, and then nothing. Just the relentless pounding of the rain and the howling of the wind through the trees. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped my tent and peered out. The campsite was in disarray. The remains of our fire hissed and sputtered in the rain. Jasper's flashlight lay on the ground, its beam flickering weakly. Of Jasper himself. It was no sign. "Jasper?" I called softly, then louder. "Ayana?" No response. I crawled out of my tent, rain immediately soaking through my clothes. That's when I saw it. The dark shape sprawled beside the dying embers of our fire. My stomach churned as I approached, already knowing what I would find, but hoping desperately that I was wrong. It was Ayana, or what was left of her. I'll spare you the details, but it was clear that whatever had attacked her wasn't a normal predator. The wounds were too savage, too deliberate. I've seen my fair share of animal attacks over the years. Bears, mountain lions, even the occasional wolf. But this was something else entirely. Something that sent primal fear coursing through my vein. In that moment, every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't leave Jasper behind. I had to at least try to find him. "Jasper?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Jasper, where are you?" The only answer was the howling of the wind and a sound that chilled me to my core, a guttural growl coming from the darkness. Beyond our campsite. Didn't think, I just ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and on as I ran. The rain made everything slick and I lost count of how many times I slipped and fell. But each time, the memory of Ayana's mangled body and that inhuman growl spurred me back to my feet. I had no plan, no destination in mind. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and whatever horror lurked back at the campsite. The rational part of my mind, trained in wilderness survival, knew I was making a terrible mistake. Running blindly through an unfamiliar forest at night, in the middle of a storm, was a recipe for disaster. But fear isn't rational, and the fear that gripped me that night was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness and rain. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake my terror. My legs felt like lead, and each breath was a struggle. I stumbled to a stop leaning against a massive tree trunk as I fought to catch my breath. As my pulse slowly began to steady, I forced myself to take stock of my situation. I was lost, alone, and woefully unprepared. In my panic, I'd left behind most of our supplies. All I had was what I'd been wearing when I went to sleep, a t-shirt, cargo pants, and hiking boots. My pockets held a few essentials, a multi-tool, a lighter, and thankfully my emergency GPS beacon. I know I should activate the beacon. It was standard procedure in any emergency situation, but something held me back. What if whatever had attacked us could track the signal? What if I led it straight to any rescue party? No, I decided I couldn't risk anyone else's life. I had to find my way out on my own. The storm was beginning to ease, the downpour reducing to a steady drizzle. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized I could make out vague shapes around me. The sky was beginning to lighten, ever so slightly. Dawn wasn't far off. I picked a direction that I hoped would lead me towards one of the ranger stations and started walking. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. More than once I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision, only for it to vanish when I turned to look. As the sky slowly brightened from black to a dull gray, I found myself in a small clearing. A stream trickled nearby, and I gratefully sank to my knees beside it, cupping my hands to drink the cold, clear water. I splashed some on my face, wincing as it stung the numerous scratches I'd accumulated during my frantic flight. That's when I heard it again, the rustling, closer this time, much closer. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. There was a snort, a snarl, and then it emerged from the bushes. Even now, years later, I struggle to describe what I saw. It stood on two legs, easily 7 feet tall, thick, matted fur covered its powerful body. Its head was wolf-like, but distorted somehow, elongated in a way that was profoundly unnatural. And its eyes, God, its eyes! They glowed a sickly yellow, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that no animal should possess. I was so stunned, so rooted to the spot by sheer terror that I didn't even try to run. It leapt at me with impossible speed, knocking me flat. I tried to fight it off, kicking and punching, but it was like hitting a brick wall. It pinned me down effortlessly, its hot breath reeking of carrion as it snarled in my face. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a sound, 2 sharp cracks. Gunshots. The creature snarled, its weight suddenly lifting off me. I opened my eyes, heart pounding, to see 2 blurry figures running towards me. My vision swam, the stress and exhaustion of the night finally overtaking me, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, a steady beep of a heart monitor filling the air. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare. But the pain in my body and the haunted looks on the faces of the people around my bed told me otherwise. I learned that a couple of hikers had been in the area and heard the shots. They'd found me unconscious by the creek with fresh wounds that looked like claw marks. The creature, whatever it was, had vanished without a trace. The police were there too, full of questions about what had happened to Jasper and Ayana. I told them everything. The strange tracks we had found, the attack on our camp, the creature I had encountered in the clearing. But I could see the doubt in their thigh. They exchanged looks. The comment said, poor guy's been through a trauma. He's not thinking straight. They wrote it off as an animal attack, probably a grizzly bear. I insisted it was something else, unnatural, but they just patted me on the shoulder and told me I was lucky to be alive. The doctor were much better. They gave me some pills for anxiety and pain, ran a battery of tests, and discharged me a few days later with a recommendation for trauma counseling. I went back to Glacier, tried to up the pieces of my life. But nothing was the same. The forest that I had once found so peaceful now seemed full of hidden dangers. Every shadow held the potential for horror. I couldn't sleep without seeing those glowing yellow eyes. Couldn't close my eyes without hearing Jasper's final desperate shout. The official reports listed Jasper and Ayana as missing, Funum dead. Animal attack, likely a bear. They never found their bodies. I was the only survivor, but no one believed my story. People started giving me strength. Locks whispering behind my back. That ranger who went crazy. They'd say, I guess it's easier to believe a man is insane than to believe in monsters. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I quit my job, Glacier behind. I moved to a city far from any national good parks, took a desk job, kept my head down. It's been a lonely existence. Sometimes in my dark moments I wonder if I am losing my mind. Did I imagine it all? Or was it just a trauma-induced hallucination? But then there are nights when I wake up, drenched in sweat, hearing the rustle of leaves, the snarl in the darkness. And I know that thing is still out there. It got my friends, but it didn't get me. Not yet. It's been 5 years since that fateful night in Glacier National Park, but the memories haunt me still. I've tried to move on, to build a new life far from the wilderness that once felt like home, but the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you run. My days are filled with the monotony of office work, a stark contrast to the life I once led. I push papers, attend meetings, and try to ignore the pity looks from co-workers who've heard rumors about my past. At night, I return to a small apartment, its walls adorned with photos, cityscapes, and abstract art. Anything to avoid reminder of the natural world I left behind. But no matter how hard I try to forget, the beast lingers in the shadows of my mind. Some nights I wake up gasping, my sheets drenched in sweat, the echo of an inhuman growl ringing in my ears. On those nights, sleep eludes me, and I find myself poring over news articles, police reports, anything that might give me a clue about what really happened. I've become something of an amateur cryptozoologist, though I keep my research hidden from prying eyes. My apartment closet is filled with books on folklore, mythical creatures, and unexplained phenomena. I've connected with others online who claim to have had similar experiences, though I'm always cautious about how much I share. One day, about 3 years after the incident, I received an unmarked package. Inside was a USB drive and a note that simply read, "You're not crazy." The drive contained trail cam footage from various national parks, including Glacier. Most of it was ordinary: deer, elk, the occasional bear. But there was one video that made my blood run cold. It was grainy and dark, clearly taken at night, but there was no mistaking the figure that loped across the frame. 7 feet tall, wolf-like head, yellow eyes gleaming in the infrared light. It was only on screen for a few seconds, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears and, in a twisted way, validate my sanity. I tried to track down the source of the package, but every lead went nowhere. It seemed like whoever sent it wanted to remain anonymous. Perhaps they feared the same ridicule and disbelief that I had faced. As the years passed, I found myself drawn back to the wilderness despite my fears. I started small, day hikes in local parks, always in groups, always in well-trafficked areas. But gradually, I felt the call of the deep forest growing stronger. Last summer, I took a leave of absence from work and returned to Glacier National Park. I told myself it was for closure, but deep down, I knew was searching for answers. I hired a guide, not trusting myself. Along in the backcountry, and we retraced the route of that ill-fated perimeter check. We found nothing concrete, no strange tracks, no signs of the creature. But standing in that small clearing where we had made our final camp, I felt a presence. It was as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. My guide dismissed my unease, attributing it to my past trauma. But I knew better. As we were packing up to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing. For a brief moment, I saw those yellow eyes glowing in the shadows. By the time I caught back to my guide, it was gone. He saw nothing and gently suggested that it might be time to head back. I left later with more questions than answers, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew now that I can't run from my past forever. The beast is out there, and I have a responsibility to find out what it is to prevent others from suffering the same fate as Jasper and Ayana. I've started reaching out to other park rangers, wildlife biologists, and a few open-minded cryptozoologists. We're forming a small, discreet group dedicated to investigating unexplained phenomena in our national parks. It's slow going. Most people still think I'm crazy, but I'm no longer alone in my search for the truth. I don't know if I'll ever fully unravel the mystery of what happened that night in Glacier. The beast may remain the shadow, glimpsed only in nightmares and grainy video footage, but I've learned that running from your fears only gives them power over you. I'm done running. So if you're ever hiking in one of our national parks, and you hear a rustle in the underbrush that doesn't sound quite right, or catch a glimpse of yellow eyes in the darkness, remember my story. Remember that lurk in the spaces between what we don't know, what we fear to know. And if you do encounter something that shouldn't exist, don't make my mistake. Don't run. Stand your ground, face your fear, and above all, wilderness of our world, unwillingness to believe. My name's Wyatt, and I've been a mechanic for most of my adult life. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps a roof over my head. For years, my one real escape has been fishing. Every weekend I can manage it. I pack up my old Ford and head out to the lakes, seeking some peace and quiet away from the constant grind of wrenches and the smell of motor oil. It was late September, about 2 years back, when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the world in shades out of red and gold. I had been feeling restless, like I needed to get farther away than usual. So I decided to treat myself to a long weekend up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a place I'd heard about, but never visited. The drive took most of Friday. I left straight from work, my hands stained with grease despite scrubbing them, raw in the shop sink. The farther north I drove, the more the world seemed to open up. Suburbs gave way to farmland, then to forests that grew denser with each passing mile. As the sun began setting, I stopped at a little roadside diner called Mabel's. It was one of those places that looks like it hadn't changed since the night. All chrome and red vinyl booths. The waitress, an old woman with graying hair and kind eyes, recommended the steak. Best cut this side of the neck and neck, she said with a wink. I don't usually splurge on meals, but something about her smile and adventure ahead made me feel reckless. So I ordered the steak, medium rare, with a baked potato and green beans on the side. While I waited for my food, I struck up a conversation with an old-timer at the counter. His name was Frank, and he'd lived in the UP his whole life. "Where you headed, son?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. I told him about the lake I was planning to fish, showing him the spot on a map. I brought Frank's bushy eyebrows. I laughed it off, assuring him that I knew how to handle myself in the woods. But something in his tone stuck with me, a hint of worry that seemed out of place for a simple fishing trip. The steak, when it arrived, was everything the waitress had promised. I savored every bite, knowing it might be my last hot meal for a few days. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked up, though, I saw nothing but other diners focused on their own meals. Back on the road, the night seemed to press in around my truck. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but endless trees and the occasional reflective eyes of animals watching from the roadside. I cranked up the radio, trying to drown out the silence, but static overtook every station until I gave up and drove in silence. It was well past midnight when I finally reached the lake. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the water. The air had a sharp bite to it, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something wild and unfamiliar. I planned to set up camp properly, but exhaustion was settling into my bones. So I just threw my tent up quickly, not bothering with anything fancy. The nylon rustled in the light breeze as I staked it down, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. With shelter secured, I got a small fire going. The flames danced, pushing back the darkness and offering a welcome warmth. I cracked open a beer from my cooler. The familiar hiss of carbonation was oddly comforting in this unfamiliar place. Sitting by the fire, I tried to relax, letting the stress of the long drive and the work week melt away, but I could shake a growing sense of unease. The waves lapping at the shore sounded almost like whisper, and more than once I caught myself straining to make out words in the white noise. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake, my heart racing. The fire had burned down to embers, and the night had grown even colder. Something had woken me, but I couldn't say what. Then I heard it, a long, mournful howl in the distance. Wolves? I told myself, just wolves, but it didn't sound quite right. The pitch was off, somehow both deeper and more guttural than any wolf I'd ever heard, and underneath it all was a note that sounded almost human. I shivered, and not just from the cold. Suddenly my tent seemed far too flimsy, too exposed, but it was all I had. So I crawled inside, zipping the door shut, as if that thin barrier could protect me from whatever was out there in the dark. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of running through endless woods, always pursued by something I couldn't quite see. When dawn finally broke, I was more exhausted than when I go to bed. Pulled out of my tent, muscles aching from the long drive and the uncomfortable night. The morning was crisp and clear, the lake a mirror reflecting the slowly brightening sky. In the light of day, my fears from the night before seemed silly. This was why I'd come after all, for the beauty and solitude of nature. I got a fire going again and set about making coffee, the familiar routine helping to ground me. As the rich aroma filled the air, I looked out over the lake, planning my day. There was a cove I'd read about online, supposedly a great spot for trout. It was a bit of a hike, but I figured it would be worth it. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, I packed up my gear and set out. The trail was overgrown in places, clearly not used much, but that just added to the sense of adventure. I took my time, enjoying the crisp air and the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy above. It took most of the morning to reach the cove, but when I finally broke through the trees and saw it, my breath caught in my throat. It was perfect, a small, sheltered inlet with clear water that promised to be teeming with fish. I sat up my rod, my movements almost reverent in this pristine place. The first cast sent ripples across the smooth surface of the water, breaking the perfect reflection of sky and trees. For hours I lost myself in the rhythm of casting and reeling, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore a soothing backdrop. I had a few good bites, but nothing I could land. Still, it hardly mattered. Just being out here, away from the noise and bustle of everyday life, reward enough. As the sun climbed higher, though, my stomach began to remind me that instant oatmeal wasn't much of a breakfast. Reluctantly, I packed up my gear and began the hike back to my campsite. I brought some sandwiches and was looking forward to eating them by the lake. Offshore, the hike back seemed quicker, my feet finding the path more easily. Tameo. As I came over a ridge about halfway back to my camp, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, a few hundred yards away, by the water's edge, was something. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in familiar terms. A bear, maybe? But no, it was too big, and its shape was all wrong. I ducked behind some brush, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it must be audible. The creature hadn't to notice me, so I slowly lowered myself to the ground, trying to get a better look while staying hidden. When I saw defied explanation, it was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, even hunched over as it was. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, but its build was all wrong for any animal I knew. It stood on 2 legs, like a man, but its proportions were off. Arms too long, torso too broad, in its head. God, its head. It was like a wolf's, but larger. The muzzle longer and more pointed. Its ears were large and pointed, swiveling this way and that, as if constantly alert for danger. As I watched, frozen in terror, it turned slightly. I caught a glimpse of its eyes. They were intelligent, far too intelligent for an animal. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this was no ordinary predator. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. My mind reeled, unable to process what I was seeing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but any sudden movement could draw its attention. So I lay there, barely breathing, watching as this impossible creature sniffed the air and paced along the shoreline. After what felt like hours, it was probably only minutes, it turned and looked off into the woods. Myself to move, my limbs shaking so badly I could barely coordinate them. I half ran, half stumbled back to my campsite, no longer caring about stealth. My only thought was to get to my truck, to get away from this place and the horror I'd witnessed. When I finally burst out of the trees and saw my little camp relief washed over me so strongly I nearly collapsed. But even as I threw my gear haphazardly into the truck, a part of my mind was already trying to rationalize what I'd seen. It must have been a bear, I told myself. Just a bear walking. Funny, that's all. The rest was just my imagination, spurred by lack of sleep and Frank's warnings. It wasn't until I was miles down the road, the forest receding in my rearview mirror, that I allowed myself to consider the truth. What I'd seen, it was real. It was no bear, no known animal. It was something else, something that walked the line between man and beast. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until I was back in familiar territory. Even then, I didn't feel safe. For weeks after, I jumped at every shadow, started at every unexpected sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something had followed me back from those dark woods. I've tried to convince myself it was all a mistake, a trick of the light, or an overactive imagination. But deep down, I know what I saw, and I know that out there in the wild places of the world, There are things that defy explanation, things that were not meant to see or understand. I still fish, still seek out those quiet places away from the noise of everyday life. But I'm more cautious now, more aware of the shadows at the edge of the firelight. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, I think I hear a howl in the distance. A sound that's not quite wolf, not quite human, but something in between. And is someday, it might find me again. The crisp Montana air filled my lungs as I stepped out of my cabin. The early morning sun just beginning to peek over the jagged peaks of Glacier National Park. My name is Finn McAllister, and for the past 5 years, I've been a park ranger in this breathtaking wilderness. It's a job I've always dreamed of, being surrounded by nature, protecting the land, and helping others enjoy its beauty. That particular morning started like any other. I grabbed my gear, radio, first aid kit, map, compass, and my trusty Winchester Model 70 rifle. The rifle was mostly for show and the occasional problem bear, but its weight on my shoulder was always reassuring. Little did I know how grateful I'd be for it later. As I made my way down to the ranger station, I took in the sights and sounds of the park coming to life. The chirping of mountain birds and the distant call of a pileated woodpecker echoed through the trees. A light mist clung to the ground, giving the forest an almost ethereal quality. It was moments like these that made me fall in love with this job all over again. At the station, I checked in with my colleague Lisa. She'd been on the night shift and looked ready to call it quits. "Morning, Finn," she said, stifling a yawn. "All quiet last night, just half an hour from the station. Just had to escort a couple of campers back to their site," she added. "They got turned around in the dark." I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Thanks, Lisa. Get some rest. I'll take it from here." As Lisa headed out, I settled in to review the day's tasks. Trail maintenance on the High Line, a check on the backcountry campsites, and a meet and greet with a school group coming in for a day hike. Pretty standard stuff. I was just about to head out when the station door swung open and in walked Marcus. Marcus Henderson was something of a local legend. A 72-year-old former marathoner who ran the park trails every single morning, rain or shine. He'd been doing it for decades, and I swear he knew these mountains better than anyone. But something was off. Marcus' usual cheerful demeanor was nowhere to be seen. His face was pale, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead, not the kind you'd expect from a morning run. "Hey, Marcus," I said, immediately concerned. "You all right?" He shook his head, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Finn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something out there, something wrong." I felt a chill run down my spine. In all the years I'd known Marcus, I'd never seen him rattled like this. He'd encountered bears, mountain lions, even a wolverine once, and always came back with an excited grin and a story to tell. But this was different. "What do you mean, Marcus? What did you see?" He slumped into a chair, running a shaky hand through his silver hair. I was on the South Peak Trail, my usual route. It was still pretty dark, foggy too. I almost turned back, but he trailed off, his gaze distant. "For what?" I approached gently. Marcus looked up at me, and the fear in his eyes made my stomach clench. "There's something out there, Finn. Something big. At first I thought it might be a grizzly, but it was all wrong. The shape, the way it moved, it was too fast, too, unnatural." I tried to keep my voice calm, even as my mind raced through possibility. "Did you get a good look at it?" He shook his head. "Not really. It was dark, like I said. But I saw fur and claws. God, those claws." Marcus shuddered. There was something else on the trail. Something that thing had been at. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? Marcus swallowed hard, his face ashen, blood thin, so out of it. Whatever that thing was, it tore something apart badly. I felt my professional mask slightly being replaced by a growing sense of dread. But I had a job to do. I thanked Marcus home to rest. As I gathered my gear and prepared to head out the South Peak Trail, I could shake the feeling that I was about to step into something far beyond my experience as a park ranger. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change my life forever. The drive to the South Peak Trailhead was tense. I'd radioed in to let the station know where I was heading, but I decided not to mention the specifics of Marcus' story. No need to cause a panic over what could just be a bear attack, albeit a gruesome one. As I parked the ranger truck and stepped out, I was struck by an unsettling silence. The usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. The morning mist clung to the ground, reduced visibility and adding to the foreboding atmosphere. I checked my rifle, making sure it was loaded, and slung it over my shoulder. The weight of it was reassuring, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind wondered if it would be enough if I encountered whatever had spooked Marcus so badly. The trail started off normally enough that a well-worn path wound its way through towering pines and firs, the branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the mist. I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of disturbance, broken branches, scuff marks, anything out of the ordinary. About a mile in, I noticed the first sign that something was amiss. A set of tracks in a muddy section of the trail caught my eye. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, but as I knelt to examine them closer, my blood ran cold. These prints were much larger than any bear I'd ever encountered, and the shape was off. The claws left deep gouges in the earth, suggesting a creature of immense size and strength. I snapped a few photos with my phone, trying to keep my hand steady. As I stood up, a gust of wind carried a scent that made my stomach lurch, the metallic tang of blood mixed with something else, something rotten. Steeling myself, I pressed the one. The smell grew stronger as I rounded a bend in the trail, and then I saw it. A wide swath of the path was covered in blood and other things I didn't want to identify. It looked like something had been dragged across the trail and into the dense underbrush. My training kicked in and I radioed back to the station. This is Ranger McAllister. I've got a situation on South Peak Trail. Possible animal attack. Lots of blood. Requesting backup and animal control. The radio crackled with Lisa's voice. Copy that, Finn. Backup's on the way.
Be careful out there.
I thought I should wait for backup, but something compelled me to investigate further. The jag marks led off the trail into a thicket of dense vegetation. Against my better judgments, I unshouldered my rifle and followed the grisly trail. The underbrush was thick, making progress slow and difficult. Branches clawed at my clothes, and more than once I stumbled over hidden roots. The silence was oppressive, broken only by my labored breathing and the snap of twigs under my boots. Suddenly a sound ahead made me freeze. It was a low, guttural noise. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt. Something large was moving through the forest, just out of sight. My heart pounding, I raised my rifle and peered through the trees. At first, I saw nothing but shadows and mist. Then a shape emerged, dark, massive, moving on all fours. For a split second, I thought it was a bear, but as it turned its head, I realized how terribly wrong I was. The creature stood up on its hind legs, towering at least 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, but its proportions were all wrong for any animal I knew. The arms were too long, ending in hands tipped with wicked claws. But it was the face that sent a jolt of primal terror through me. The snout was elongated, somewhere between a wolf and a bear, lined with teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They glowed, an eerie yellow in the gloom, filled with an unnatural intelligence. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We stared at each other. I saw something in those eyes. Hunger, yes, but also a cold, calculating awareness that chilled me to my core. This was no mere animal. This was something else entirely. Without conscious thought, I raised my rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the forest like a thunderclap, and the creature let out a howl that made my blood run cold. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in nature, part animal roar, part human scream with an otherworldly quality that defied description. I didn't wait to see if I'd hit it. Pure survival instinct took over and I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning as I gulped in air. Behind me I could hear the thing crashing through the forest in pursuit, its howls growing closer by the second. Blonde panic drove me forward. I fired wildly over my shoulder, not aiming, just hoping to slow the creature down. The forest was a blur of green and brown. My world narrowed to the pounding of my heart and the sound of pursuit. I burst out onto the main trail, my legs nearly giving up beneath me. I risked a glance back and saw nothing. The creature had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the echo of its unearthly howl hanging in the air. Gasping for breath, I fumbled for my radio. This is McAllister, I panted. I need immediate assistance. South Peak Trail. There's something out here, something not natural. As I waited for a response, slumped against a tree, I tried to process what I'd just seen, but my mind recoiled from the memory. Unable or unwilling to accept the reality of the creature I'd encountered. One thing was certain, the forests of Glacier National Park held secrets far darker and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. The wait for backup felt like an eternity. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I kept my rifle trained on the tree line, half expecting the creature to burst forth at any moment. But nothing came. When I heard the distant rumble of ATVs, I nearly wept with relief. Two of my fellow rangers, Mike and Janice, came into view, followed closely by a local animal control officer named Dave. "Fun!" Mike called out as he dismounted. "You okay? You look like hell, man." That must have been quite a sight, clothes torn, covered in dirt and scratches, wild-eyed and still breathing heavily. I lowered my rifle, realizing my hands were shaking. I don't know. I managed to say, "There's something out there, something. I can even describe it." Janice approached cautiously, her own rifle at the ready. "What happened? Ben, your call wasn't very clear." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen without sounding completely insane? I was checking out a report of a possible animal attack. I began. There was blood on the trail, a lot of it. I followed the trail into the wood, and then I saw something. Dave, the animal control officer, stepped forward. A bear? Mountain lion. I shook my head vehemently. No, it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall when it stood up. It had fur, claws, but the face was all wrong. In its eye, I trailed off. The memory of those glowing yellow eyes sending a shiver down my spine. The others exchanged glances. I could see the skepticism in their eyes, and I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, would not believe it either. Okay, Mike said slowly. Let's backtrack. Show us where this all started. We made our way back down the trail. The others. Yes, on high alert. When we reached the blood-stained area, Dave let out a low whistle. That's a lot of blood, he muttered, kneeling to examine the scene. Whatever did this was big, Janice agreed. The fin, are you sure? And it wasn't just a grizzly? Maybe. The fog and the stress made it seem different. Part of me wanted to agree with her, to find some rational explanation for what I'd seen. But I knew what I saw. No, I said firmly. This wasn't a bear. I know what I saw. We spent the next few hours combing the area. Dave took samples of the blood and fur we found, promising to have them analyzed. We found my spent shell casings where I'd fired at the creature, but no sign that I'd hit it. No blood trail, no broken vegetation to indicate an injured animal flee. In fact, aside from the initial blood-stained area, we found surprisingly little evidence of the creature's passage. It was as if it had simply vanished into thin air. As the day wore on, I could sense the others' growing frustration and disbelief. They were good. People, dedicated rangers, but they hadn't seen what I had. To them, this was starting to look like a wild goose chase. Look thin, Mike said as we prepared to head back. I'm not saying he didn't see something, but maybe it wasn't quite what you thought it was. Stress, low visibility, it can play tricks on your mind. I wanted to argue, to make them understand the otherworldliness of what I'd encountered, but I could see it was useless. Without proof, my story was just that, a story. The ride back to the ranger station was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I knew I should feel relieved. I survived, after all, but felt a growing sense of unease. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there. And I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. As we pulled up to the station, I made a decision. I couldn't just let this go. I needed answers and was going to find them, no matter what it took. Little did I know my search for the truth would lead me down a dark path, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. In the days following my encounter, life at Glacier National Park took on a surreal quality. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Tourists still flocked to the trails, wildlife sightings were logged, and the daily routines of park management continued. But underneath it all, I felt a constant tension, a nagging sense that something fundamental had changed. The official report of the incident was maddeningly vague. Possible animal attack, species unknown, no casualties reported, further investigation pending. Dave's analysis of the blood and fur samples had come back inconclusive. The blood was from a deer, but the fur, well, the labs couldn't quite pin it down. Unidentified characteristics, the report said. But with anomalies that require further study, my colleagues treated me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. I caught whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room, saw sidelong glances and raised eyebrows. Nobody said it outright, but I could tell what they were thinking. That the stress of the job had finally gotten to me, that simply imagined or exaggerated what I'd seen, but I knew what I saw, the memory of those glowing eyes, that unearthly howl haunted my dreams. I threw myself into research, spending every free moment poring over wildlife reports, local legends, and even fringe cryptozoology websites. anything that might give me a clue about what I'd encountered. My obsession didn't go unnoticed. Lisa, my fellow ranger and closest friend in the park, confronted me about it one evening as I was hunched over my laptop in the station break room. Then she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder, "You need to let this go. It's consuming you." I looked up at her, seeing the word etched on her face. "I can't, Lisa, you don't understand. What I saw out there wasn't natural and still out there." She sighed, pulling up a chair beside me. "Look, I believe that you believe you saw something. But Finn, there's been no other sightings, no unusual animal activity. Don't you think it's possible that maybe, just maybe, your mind played tricks on you?" I wanted to agree with her, to find some rational explanation that would let me sleep at night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. "I know how it sounds, Lisa, but I know what I saw, and I can't just ignore it." She nodded, resigned. "Just be careful, okay? Don't do anything stupid." As Lisa left, I turned back to my research. That's when I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was an obscure forum thread discussing strange sightings in national parks across the country. Most of it was the usual Bigfoot and UFO nonsense, but one post caught my eye. It described an encounter in Yellowstone, not too far from Glacier, that sounded eerily similar to mine. A hiker had reported seeing a large bipedal creature with glowing eyes and an unnatural howl. The post was several years old, and the original poster had never followed up. But it was enough to convince me that I wasn't alone in what I'd seen. Over the next few weeks, I discreetly reached out to rangers in other parks asking about unusual sightings or unexplained incidents. Most dismissed me outright, but a few had stories of their own, nothing as direct as my encounter, but tales of eerie howls in the night, oversized tracks that didn't match any known species, and an unsettling sense of being watched in the deep woods. As I collected these stories, a pattern began to emerge. The sightings were rare, but they seemed to cluster around certain areas: remote, rugged terrain, far from the usual tourist trails, and they often coincided with periods of unusually severe weather or natural disasters. My breakthrough came when I managed to get in touch with Dr. Eleanor Chin, a wildlife biologist who'd been studying predator populations in the Rocky Mountains. At first she was hesitant to talk, but when I shared some of the details of my encounter, she agreed to meet me. We met at a small diner just outside the park boundaries. Dr. Chen was a small, intense woman with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Mr. McAllister," she said as soon as we sat down, "before we begin, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you, it's not official. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Are we clear?" I nodded, my heart racing, crystal clear. She leaned in, her voice low. "For the past decade, I've been tracking what I believe to be an undiscovered species, something that defies conventional classification. My colleagues think I'm chasing fairy tales, but the evidence, it's there if you know where to look." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, barely able to contain my excitement. "Genetic samples that don't match any known species, tracks and markings that suggest a level of intelligence far beyond normal animals, and sightings like yours." I told her everything about my encounter, sparing no detail. As I spoke, I saw her eyes widen, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Mr. McAllister," she said when I finished, "what you saw, I believe it's real, and I believe it's far more dangerous than anyone realizes." "What is it?" I asked, my mouth dry. Dr. Chen shook her head. "I don't know, not for certain, but I have a theory. I think we're dealing with something that's been here far longer than us, something that's learned to hide, something that's learned to adapt. It's intelligent, Mr. McAllister, intelligent and ancient. But why haven't more people seen it? Why isn't there more evidence? Because it doesn't want to be seen, she replied grimly. These creatures, whatever they are, they're masters of camouflage and misdirection. They don't leave evidence behind because they know how to cover their tracks, and the few who do see them, well, let's just say not all of them, live to tell about it. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the blood on the trail, the raw power of the creature I had encountered. What could we do? Dr. Chen's expression was grim. For now, we watch, we gather evidence, and we stay alert. Because I think they're becoming bolder. The sightings are increasing, Mr. McAllister. Something's changing in their behavior, and I fear it's only a matter of time before she trailed off. But I could fill in the blank. Before someone else encountered one of these things. Before someone didn't make it out alive. As I left the diner, my mind was reeling. I'd gone looking for answers, but instead I'd found myself pulled into something far larger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. The forest I'd once seen as a sanctuary now felt like a battlefield, with an enemy I barely understood lurking in the shadows. I knew I should walk away, report what I'd learned to my superiors, and let them handle it. As I drove back to the park, watching the sun set behind the jagged peaks, I made a decision. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when I knew what was out there. Whatever these creatures were, whatever dark secret lurked in the wilderness, I was going to find out. And somehow, someway, I was going to protect the park and the people in it. Even if it cost me everything. I began mapping out the areas where sightings had occurred, both in Glacier and other parks. A pattern emerged. These creatures, whatever they were, seemed to favor the most rugged, inaccessible terrain. Places where the boundary between civilization and wilderness was at its thinnest. One area in particular caught my attention, a remote section of Glacier known as the Devil's Backbone. It was a treacherous region of sheer cliffs and dense forests, rarely visited even by the most experienced hikers. It was there that I realized the highest concentration of unusual activity had been reported. I knew it was reckless, possibly even suicidal to go there alone, but I also knew that no one else would believe me, let alone accompany me. So, on a crisp autumn morning, I left a vague note about checking some trail markers and set out for the Devil's Backbone. The journey was grueling, the terrain was even more challenging than I'd anticipated, with narrow ledges and near vertical climbs that tested the limits of my experience. As I pushed deeper into the wilderness, I felt an increasing sense of isolation, as if I were crossing some invisible boundary into another world. It was late afternoon when I reached the heart of the Devil's Backbone. I found myself in a narrow valley, hemmed in by towering cliffs on all sides. The forest here was old. The trees were gnarled and twisted into bizarre shapes. A unnatural silence hung over everything, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the leaf-strewn ground. As the shadows lengthened, I began to feel watched. There was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a certainty that eyes were following my every move. I gripped my rifle tighter and scanned the deepening gloom for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a flash of yellow eyes in the underbrush. There and gone, so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. But then I heard it, that same bone-chilling howl that had haunted my dreams for weeks. My heart pounding, I raised my rifle and called out, "I know you're there, show yourself." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly a shape emerged from the shadows. It was the creature I'd encountered before. But seeing it here in its own domain, I realized how little I'd truly comprehended its nature. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to shift between animal and something unsettlingly human-like. Its fur was a mottled pattern that blended perfectly with the forest shadows. But it was the face that truly chilled me. A twisted amalgam of wolf and bear, with eyes that glowed with an intelligence that was anything but animal. We stared at each other, neither moving. How long I should run? should shoot, should do something. But I was transfixed, caught in the creature's gaze like a rabbit before a snake. Then it spoke. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a guttural growl that somehow formed words. "You should not be here." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. You can talk." The creature's mouth twisted into what might have been a grimace or a smile. It was impossible to tell. "We have always talked," it growled. "You have not listened. What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "We are the old ones," it growled. "We were here before. We will be here after." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. But before I could voice any of them, the creature's head snapped up, its nostrils flaring. "Others come," it snarled. "You bring danger." So I heard then the distant womp-womp of helicopter blades. Search and rescue, I realized. They must have figured out where I'd gone. When I turned back, the creature was already retreating into the shadows. "Wait," I called out. "I have so many questions." It paused, looking back at me with those eerie yellow eyes. "Questions bring death," it growled. "Forget, or die." And then it was gone, melting into the forest as if it had never been there at all. I stood there, shaking as the sound of the helicopter grew louder. Part of me wanted to chase after the creature, to demand answers to the 1,000 questions burning in my mind. But another part, a wiser part, knew that I'd been given a warning, and perhaps a chance. As the helicopter's searchlights swept over the valley, I made my decision. I would go back. I would tell them I got lost, that I'd had a close encounter with a bear. I would let them believe that my obsession had been nothing more than stress and an overactive imagination. But I would know the truth, and I would carry with me the certainty that out there in the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness, something ancient and unknowable was watching and waiting. As I was lifted into the helicopter, I took one last look at the forest below. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. Then they were gone, and I was left with nothing but questions and the haunting memory of a voice that should not exist. The forest had shared its secret with me, and I knew that my life would never be the same. The wilderness I had once thought I understood was now a place of mystery and danger, and somewhere out there the creature, the old one, was waiting. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what I encountered in the Devil's Backbone, but I do know this. The line between the world we know and the world we don't is far thinner than we realize. And sometimes, if we listen closely, the wilderness whispers secrets that can change everything. It's been 2 years since my encounter in the Devil's Backbone. On the surface, life has returned to normal. I still work as a ranger in Glacier National Park, patrol the same trails, and look after the same campsites. But everything has changed. I've kept my promise. I haven't spoken to anyone about what really happened that day. Dr. Chen disappeared shortly after our meeting, her research discredited and her reputation in tatters. Sometimes I wonder if she found what she was looking for or if something found her. The official report on my misadventures cites exhaustion and a possible bear encounter. My colleagues treat me with a mixture of concern and pity, as if I'm a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession. Little do they know that my obsession hasn't faded, it's simply gone underground. I still research, still map out sightings and unexplained phenomena, but I do it quietly, carefully. I've learned the value of secrecy, of blending in. In that, I suppose I've taken the lesson from the creatures I encountered. There have been no more direct sightings, no more face-to-face encounters. But sometimes when I'm deep in the backcountry, I feel those eyes on me. I hear whispers in the wind that sound almost like words. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that they're still out there watching, waiting. I don't know what the future holds. Part of me hopes that I'll never encounter those creatures again, that I can live out my days in blissful ignorance of the secrets the wilderness holds. But another part, a part that grows stronger with each passing day, knows that's impossible. The encounter changed me. It opened my eyes to a world beyond the one I thought I knew. And now that I've seen it, I can never unsee it. The wilderness is no longer just a place of beauty and solitude. It's a frontier, a boundary between worlds. And I, for better or worse, am its reluctant guardian. So I'll keep watching, I'll keep listening. And if the day comes when those yellow eyes emerge from the shadows once more, I'll be ready. Because someone has to stand at the boundary. Someone has to know the truth. And in the end, that someone is me. I stood in the cramped kitchen of the ranger station, scratching a mosquito bite on my neck and wishing I were anywhere else. My name is Gus Larkins, and I've been with the United States Forest Service for nearly a decade. You learn a lot in this job. How to read a map by starlight. How to build a fire with wet wood. And how to tell when a search is going to end badly. But none of that prepared me for what I encountered in the Ozark National Forest. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the air with a rich aroma of dark roast. Outside, the first light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the dense canopy of oak and hickory trees. I poured myself a cup, savoring the bitter warmth as I reviewed the day's assignments. That's when the call came in. "Ranger Station, this is Gus," I answered, my free hand absently tracing the topographic map spread out on the kitchen table. The voice on the other end was young, female, and panicked. "Please, you have to help us," she said. "Our friend, he's missing." I set down my coffee, all thoughts of a quiet morning vanishing. "Okay, calm down. Take a deep breath and tell me what happened." Her name was Megan, and she was part of a group of college students who had been camping in the eastern section of the park. Their friend, Tyler Brinks, had gone off on his own 2 days ago, boasting about his wilderness skills and promising to catch them some fish for dinner. He never returned. As I jotted down the details, a familiar knot formed in my stomach. 2 days was a long time for someone to be alone in these woods, especially an inexperienced hiker. After hanging up, I radioed my partner for the day, Lena Barrow. She was a no-nonsense woman with a decade of experience and a reputation for finding people when others couldn't. "Lena, we've got a missing hiker in the eastern section. College kid named Tyler Brinks. You free?" Her response was immediate. "On my way. Meet you at the station in 15. As I geared up, pulling on my sturdy boots and packing extra supplies, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine search and rescue. The eastern section was rugged, full of steep ravines and thick underbrush. It was easy to get turned around out there, even for experienced hikers. Lena arrived right on schedule, her weathered Jeep kicking up a cloud of dust as it pulled into the parking lot. She hopped out, already dressed in her ranger uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Got a bad feeling about this one, Gus?" she asked, hefting her pack onto her shoulders. I nodded, locking up the station. "Yeah, me too. But let's hope he's just lost and not hurt." We climbed into my truck, the tires crunching on gravel as we set out towards the last known location of the missing hiker. A sun was just starting to climb, casting long shadows that made the trees look like towering sentinels. Little did we know, those shadows held secrets far darker than we could have imagined. The drive to the eastern section of the park was tense, filled with the kind of silence that comes when both people are lost in their own thoughts. Una fiddled with the radio, trying to get a weather report through the static. I kept my eyes on the narrow, winding road, watching for any wildlife that might dart out in front of us. "The forecast said we might get some rain later," Lena said, finally giving up on the radio. "Could make things tricky if we're still out there." I grunted in agreement. Rain would not only make the terrain more treacherous, but also wash away any tracks or signs that might lead us to Tyler. We needed to move fast. We arrived at the trailhead where Megan and her friends had last seen Tyler. The group of college students huddled around their car, looking exhausted and scared. I recognized the hollow-eyed look of people who hadn't slept, too worried about their missing friend. As Lena talked to the students, getting more details about Tyler's planned route. I surveyed the area. The trail started off well-marked, but quickly disappeared into dense undergrowth. Off to the side, I noticed some bent branches and disturbed leaves, signs that someone had recently gone off trail. Lena, I called, gesturing to the spot. She nodded, finishing up with the students before joining me. "Looks like our boy decided to make his own path," she said, crouching down to examine the fake trail. "Confident, wasn't he?" "Too confident," I replied, remembering Megan's description of Tyler's boasts about his wilderness skills. Let's hope that confidence didn't get him into trouble. We set off into the forest, calling out Tyler's name every few minutes. The terrain was rough, with steep inclines and thick underbrush that seemed determined to snag our clothes and slow us down. The faint trail we were following soon disappeared entirely, leaving us to rely on our instincts and training. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, as if the forest were holding its breath. The usual chorus of birdsong and insect buzzing faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under our boots and our periodic calls for Tyler. After a couple of hours, we found our first real clue. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. It matched the description of the shirt Tyler had been wearing when he disappeared. "We're on the right track," Lena said, carefully removing the fabric and sealing it in an evidence bag. "But why hasn't he responded to our calls?" I didn't voice the possibilities running through my mind that he was too injured to call out or worse. Instead, I just nodded and pressed on. Around midday, we stopped for a quick lunch. The air was thick with humidity, and the relentless buzzing of insects had returned as if they were making up for lost time. I was just about to take a bite of my sandwich when Lania's radio crackled to life. It was base camp, asking for an update. Lena filled them in. Then she turned to me with a frown. "They want us to push a bit further east towards the river." Apparently, Tyler was talking about fishing there before he disappeared. We packed up and headed east. Terrain got even tougher, with jagged rocks and fallen trees forcing us to climb over or crawl under obstacles. I could feel the strain in my legs and the sweat soaking through my shirt. As we neared the river, the forest started to thin out, and we came across an old, overgrown trail. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves and new growth. "Do you think he came this way?" Lena asked, her voice hushed in the stillness of the forest. "It's possible," I replied, studying the ground for any signs of recent passage. "Let's check it out." We followed the trail for about a mile when we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, in a small clearing, was a campsite. But not just any campsite. This one looked wrong. It was clear that someone had been here recently. The fire pit was still warm, tendrils of smoke rising from the ashes. Now, fresh footprints in the dirt and half-eaten protein bar lay next to a fallen log, but that wasn't what got to me. It was the eerie silence that hung over the place, and the sense that we were not alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could see Lena was just as unsettled. We called out for Tyler again, our voices echoing through the trees, but there was no response, just that oppressive silence. As we searched the area, we found Tyler's backpack half buried under some leaves. It looked like it had been ripped open, the contents scattered around as if someone or something had been frantically searching through it. "Lena, over here," I called, my voice tight with tension. She came over and saw what I was pointing at. Blood on the ground. Not a lot, but enough to make us worry. "Shit," she muttered, crouching down to examine the stain. "This doesn't look good." We followed the trail of blood, which led us deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker. The light started to fade as clouds rolled in, casting an ominous shadow of everything. We moved slowly, every sense on high alert. That's when we heard it. A rustling sound, followed by a low guttural noise that sent a shiver down my spine. Lena and I exchanged a glance, both of us reaching for our radios. But before we could call for backup, something large and fast barreled through the bushes, knocking Lena to the ground. I barely had time to react. I saw a flash of fur and teeth, and then it was gone, disappearing into the forest as quickly as it had appeared. Lena was on her feet in an instant, blood dripping from a gash on her arm. Jesus, what the hell was that? She gasped, her eyes wide with shock and pain. I know, I said, trying to steady my breathing as I helped her sit down on a nearby log. But it's not like anything I've seen before. As I patched up Lena's wound as best I could with our first aid kit, my mind raced. Whatever had attacked us was big, fast, and dangerous. And it was still out there, somewhere in these dark woods. We decided to head back to the campsite. Whatever this thing was, it was still out there, and we needed to get out of the forest before nightfall. But as we made our way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. When we finally reached the campsite, it was nearly dark. We radioed base camp, informing them of the situation and requesting immediate backup. While we waited, we searched the campsite again, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened to Tyler. That's when we found the first body. It wasn't Tyler, though. It was a man, his face unrecognizable, mauled beyond recognition. His clothes were torn to shreds, and it looked like he had been dead for at least a day. We didn't have time to process what we found before we heard the sound again, that same guttural noise, closer this time. We grabbed our gear and took defensive positions, eyes scanning the darkness. The attack came swiftly. One moment we were standing there, and the next, Lena was on the ground, screaming. I turned and saw the creature, larger than any animal I'd ever seen, covered in dark, matted fur. Its teeth were sharp and gleamed in the dim light. I didn't think I'd just reacted. I grabbed my knife and lunged at the thing, hoping to drive it off. But it was too fast, too strong. It knocked me aside like I was nothing and disappeared into the forest again. Lena was hurt badly, but she was still alive. I dragged her to the river, hoping the water would deter the creature. We could hear it moving in the trees, stalking us. We didn't have long to wait for backup. Within minutes, we heard the sound of helicopters and saw the lights of the rescue team. They found us by the river, battered and bloodied, but alive. As the medics worked on Lena, I told the rescue team about what we'd encountered. They looked skeptical, but when they saw the body at the campsite, their expressions changed. They secured the area and began a thorough search for Tyler and the creature. We were airlifted out of the forest, Lena to the hospital, and me to the ranger station for debriefing. The authorities took our statements and began their investigation. They found more bodies. Some old, some fresh, all mauled in the same horrific manner. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Tyler continued. The creature was never found, but the bodies were proof enough that something terrible was out there. The forest was closed to the public, and a full-scale investigation was launched. As for me, I returned to duty, a bit worse for wear, but still standing. Lena recovered from her injuries and decided to transfer to a different park, far away from the Ozarks. The case remains open, and the forest is still off limits, a dark and silent witness to the horrors that unfolded there. But sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can still hear that guttural growl, a reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, lurking in the shadows of the wilderness. The weeks following our encounter in the forest were a blur, with debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. The official investigation into the incidents at Ozark National Forest was extensive, involving not just the Forest Service, but also the State Police and even a team of wildlife experts. I spent countless hours recounting every detail of our search for Tyler and the horrifying events that followed. Each time I told the story, I could see the doubt in the investigator's eyes slowly give way to a grim acceptance as more evidence came to light. The bodies we had discovered were just the beginning. As teams combed through the eastern section of the park, they uncovered more remains, some recent, other little more than scattered bone. Forensics teams worked around the clock to identify the victims and determine the cause of death. The official report was clinical in its description. Victims show signs of massive trauma consistent with animal attack. Bite marks and claw patterns do not match any known species indigenous to the area. But those of us who had been there, who had seen the creature up close, knew that animal attack didn't begin to describe the horrors we had witnessed. Naya's recovery was slow, but steady. The physical wounds healed, leaving a network of scars across her arm and shoulder. But the psychological scars ran deeper. I visited her in the hospital whenever I could, and we would sit in silence, both of us lost in our memories of that day. I can't go back, she told me one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. Every time I close my eyes and I see that thing, I hear it. I can't do this job anymore. Understood. Part of me wanted to walk away too, to find a nice desk job somewhere far from the deep dark woods. But something kept me here. I wanted to understand what had happened, to make sure it never happened again. The media caught wind of the story, of course. At first, it was just local news of a tragic accident in the national forest. But as more detail leaked out, the story grew. National news vans began showing up at the ranger station, and my phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking interviews. The official line was that a series of animal attacks had occurred by a bear or mountain lion that had grown unusually aggressive. The forest would remain closed until the threat could be neutralized. It was a lie, but necessary one. The truth was too fantastic, too terrifying for the public to accept. But rumors spread. Locals whispered about a monster in the woods, a creature that walked like a man, but killed like a beast. Cryptozoology websites exploded with theories and blurry photos of shadows among the trees. Amateur monster hunters began sneaking into the closed-off areas of the forest, forcing us to step up patrols. Through it all, one question haunted me. What had happened to Tyler Brinks? Despite our best efforts, we never found him. Not even a trace. It was as if he had simply vanished in the forest. His parents came to the ranger station about a month after he disappeared. They were hollow-eyed and grief-stricken, clutching photos of their son and begged for answers I couldn't give them. All I could do was assure them that we're doing everything in our power to find out what had happened to their boy. As the weeks turned into months, life at the ranger station settled into a new normal. The eastern section of the park remained off-limits, surrounded by newly erected fences and monitored by motion sensor cameras. The rest of the forest was reopened to the public, but visitor numbers were down. The shadow of what had happened lingered over the entire park. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra patrols and volunteering for the toughest assignments. Anything to keep my mind occupied, to exhaust myself so thoroughly that I might be able to sleep without nightmares. But on quiet nights when the wind whispered through the trees and shadows danced at the edge of my vision, I found myself staring into the darkness, wondering if it was staring back. 6 months after the incident, I was sitting in my office, poring over maps of the eastern section for what felt like the 1000th time. The fall colors were starting to fade, leaving the forest a patchwork of brown and gray. A chill had settled over the land, a reminder that the winter was just around the corner. That's when my radio crackled to life. "Gus, you there?" It was Frank, one of our newer rangers. "We've got a situation at the east fence. You're gonna want to see this." My heart rate spiked as I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The drive to the eastern border of the park felt longer than ever, my mind racing with possibilities. Had there been another attack? Had someone managed to breach the fence? I arrived to find a small crowd gathered near one of the gates. Frank was there, along with 2 other rangers and a pair of hikers who looked like they'd seen a ghost. "What's going on?" I asked, my eyes scanning the tree line beyond the fence. Frank pointed to something on the ground just inside the gate. "Take a look." I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to the tranquilizer gun at my hip. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, half buried in the fallen leaves, was a backpack, torn and weather-beaten, but unmistakable. It was Tyler's. "Where did this come from?" I demanded, looking from Frank to the hikers. One of the hikers, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes, spoke up. "We were just walking along the fence when we saw something move in the trees. It was big and fast. We couldn't really see it." But she paused, swallowing hard. "I threw this over the fence. Then it just vanished." I crouched down to examine the backpack, my hand shaking slightly as I unzipped it. Inside, I found Tyler's wallet, his keys, and a small notebook. The pages were waterlogged and filled with hastily scribbled notes, most of them illegible. But one page caught my eye. In large phatic letters it read, "It's not alone." A chill ran down my spine as I stood up, clutching the notebook. "Frank, call it in. I want a full team out here now and get these people back to the visitor center." As the others scrambled to follow my orders, I stood there, staring into the forest beyond the fence. For a moment, I thought I saw something move among the trees. A flash of dark fur, a glint of yellow eyes. But then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever been there at all. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Search teams combed the area where the backpack had been found, but there was no sign of Tyler or the creature. Forensics experts analyzed every inch of the backpack and its contents, hoping for some clue as to what had happened. The notebook proved to be a gold mine of information, albeit a disturbing one. As we pieced together Tyler's fragmented notes, a chilling picture began to emerge. He had indeed gone off trail that day, confident in his ability to navigate the wilderness. But he had stumbled upon something he never expected. A network of caves hidden deep in the forest. And in those caves, he found evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Tyler's notes spoke of strange markings on the cave walls, of bones and artifacts that seemed to span centuries. He wrote of hearing strange noises in the night, of feeling watched wherever he went. And most disturbingly, he wrote of seeing not just one creature, but several. They're not animals, one entry read. "But you're too smart, too organized. It's like they're hunting me, toying with me. I don't know how much longer I can hide." The final pages of the notebook were filled with increasingly paranoid ramblings, the handwriting becoming more erratic with each entry. The last legible words sent a shiver down my spine. "If you're reading this, I'm probably already dead. Don't make the same mistake I did. Stay out of the forest. They're always watching." As the investigation continued, more questions arose than answers. How long had these creatures been in our forest? How many of them were there? And most importantly, what were they? Theories abounded. Some suggested an unknown species of predator. Others whispered about government experiments gone wrong. A few even talked of something older, something that had always been here, hiding in the dark places of the world. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: our understanding of the forest, of nature itself, had been fundamentally shaken in the months that followed. Security around the eastern section was tightened even further. More fences went up, armed patrols were instituted, and cutting-edge surveillance equipment was installed throughout the area. But despite our best efforts, reports continued to trickle in. Hikers spoke of strange noises at night. A feeling watched as they walked the trails. Rangers on patrol reported glimpses of large, dark shapes moving through the trees, always just at the edge of visibility. And sometimes in the dead of night we would hear it, that low, guttural growl that haunted my dreams. A reminder that out there in the depths of the forest something was waiting, watching, hunting. As for me, I stayed on at the ranger station. I couldn't leave, not now. Whatever was out there in those woods, whatever had taken Tyler and who knows how many others, I was determined to find it, to understand it, and, if necessary, to stop it. But every time I look out at those trees, every time I hear the wind whispering through the leaves, I can't help but wonder, are we the ones doing the hunting, or are we the prey? The forest keeps its secrets well, but someday, I swear I'll uncover the truth about what lurks in the shadows of the Ozark National Forest. Until then, I'll be here, watching the trees, and hoping that they're not watching back. It's been a year since Tyler's backpack appeared at the fence. Life at the ranger station has settled into a tense routine. We patrol, we watch, we wait, but we all know it's out there, somewhere in the vastness of the forest. Being out calls sometimes, usually late at night. She's working at a small nature reserve now, about as far from the Ozarks as she could get. We don't talk much about what happened, but I can hear the unasked questions in her voice. The same questions that keep me up at night. The official investigation has been closed, the incident neatly filed away as a series of animal attacks. But those of us who were there, who saw what we saw, know better. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear something calling back. Something that sounds almost human. I don't know if I'll ever find the answer I'm looking for. I don't know if I'll ever understand what really happened to Tyler or to all the others who vanished in these woods over the years. But I do know this: the forest is alive. It's watching, and it's waiting. So am I. It started like any other Saturday morning, in late September. The sky was a brilliant azure, unmarred by clouds, and a crisp breeze carried the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. I'd just come off a particularly rough week at work, my mind still buzzing with unresolved conflicts and looming deadlines. There was nothing I wanted more than to escape the cacophony of the city, to find some semblance of peace in the quiet embrace of nature. So I drove out to the Appalachians, deep into the heart of West Virginia, where the trails wind through ancient forests, and the air smells clean and untainted. I've always been drawn to these mountains, their rugged beauty a stark contrast to the concrete jungle I call home. There's something about the vastness of the wilderness that puts life into perspective, makes the day-to-day worries seem insignificant. I'm typically a loner when it comes to hiking. There's a meditative quality to solitude in the woods, a chance to reset your mind and recalibrate your soul. But today was different. I had company. Jake and Grant, two guys I'd known since high school. We weren't exactly the Three Musketeers back then, nor like casual acquaintances who shared a few classes and the occasional weekend hangout. But we had enough shared history to know we could rely on each other if push came to shove. It had been years since we'd last seen each other. Life has a way of pulling people in different directions, and we drifted apart after graduation. But when Jake called me out of the blue a few weeks ago, suggesting a reunion hike, it felt like the right thing to do. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was just the need to connect with someone from a simpler time in my life. Whatever the reason, I agreed, and so did Grant. We met up at a small diner just off the highway, the kind of place that seems frozen in time, with vinyl booths and the smell of coffee and bacon permanently embedded in the air. Jake was the first to arrive, his boisterous laugh filling the space as soon as he walked in. He hadn't changed much. Still tall and lanky, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a grin that seemed to take up half his face. He clapped me on the back as if no time had passed at all. "Man, it's good to see you," he exclaimed, sliding into the booth across from me. "How long has it been? 5 or 6 years?" "Something like that," I replied, feeling a smile tug at my own lips. Jake's enthusiasm had always been infectious. Grant arrived a few minutes later, slipping into the seat beside Jake with a quiet nod. It changed the most out of all of us. The easygoing guy I remembered from high school seemed to have been replaced by someone more reserved. His eyes carried a weight that spoke of hard times. I knew he'd been through some rough patches recently. A messy divorce, a dead-end job that was slowly crushing his spirit. But there was still a calmness about him, a quiet resilience that made you think he'd weather whatever storm life threw his way. We ordered coffee and spent the next few hours catching up, Jake dominating the conversation with animated stories about his job as a salesman and his latest romantic pursuits. Grant and I mostly listened, occasionally chimed in with our own updates. I told them about my work in IT, the long hours and the constant pressure to keep up with rapidly evolving technology. Grant spoke briefly about his job at a local factory, his words carefully measured, as if he was trying to convince himself, as much as us, that things weren't as bad as they seemed. As we finished our coffee and paid the bill, I could feel a sense of anticipation building. The day was young, the weather was perfect, and the mountains were calling. We piled into my old Jeep Cherokee, gear stowed in the back, and hit the road. The drive took us deeper into the mountain, the highway giving way to winding country, roads that snaked through valleys and climbed steep inclines. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences as we took in the scenery. Autumn was just beginning to touch the landscape, splashes of red and gold appearing on the sea of green. We reached the trailhead around mid-morning. It was a small, unmarked parking area off a gravel road, the kind of place only locals and serious hikers knew about. That's why I liked it. No crowds, no noise, just unspoiled wilderness. As we shouldered our packs and did one last equipment check, couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement, mixed with a tinge of apprehension. The trail, when chosen, wasn't particularly challenging, but it led deep into the back country, far from the more popular routes. It was a path I hiked before, but never with company and never this late in the season. "You sure you know where we're going?" Grant asked, his eyes scanning the dense forest that surrounded us. I nodded, pointing a faint path leading into the trees. "Yeah, I've done this trail a few times. It's not well marked, but it's not too hard to follow, if you know what to look for." Jake clapped his hands together, grinning. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get this adventure started." With that, we set off into the woods, leaving behind the last vestiges of civilization. The trail started off wide and well-defined, but as you progressed, it gradually narrowed, became little more than a game trail in some places. Forest closed, and around us, the canopy overhead filtering the sunlight into a soft green glow. The first few miles were filled with the usual catching up, talking about jobs, relationships, and all the other minutiae that comes with being in your third. Jake was in his element, regaling us with stories that had us laughing or shaking our heads in disbelief. He had a way of turning even the most mundane experiences into grand adventures, his hands gesticulating wildly as he spoke. Grant, true to form, was more reserved, but as the miles passed, he began to open up. He spoke about his divorce, the pain in his voice palpable as he described the slow unraveling of what he thought would be a lifelong commitment. But there was also a glimmer of hope there, a sense that he was starting to see a way forward. As for me, I was content to mostly listen, letting the rhythm of our footsteps and the rustle of leaves drown out the city's noise that had been stuck in my head all week. There's something about being in nature that puts things into perspective, makes the problems that seem so insurmountable back in the real world shrink down to a manageable size. We stopped for lunch near a stream, finding a cluster of sun-warmed rocks that made for perfect seating. The sound of water tumbling over stones provided a soothing backdrop as we broke out our sandwiches and trail mix. The sun was high, casting long shadows through the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. As we ate, the conversation turned to old times, shared memories from high school, people would know, experiences we had. It was comforting in a way to revisit those simpler days before. The weight of adult responsibilities had settled on our shoulders. Remember that time we snuck into the abandoned house on Elm Street? Jake asked, grinning at the memory. Man, I thought for sure we were going to get caught. Grant chuckled, a rare sound that seemed to lighten the air around him. Yeah, and you nearly wet yourself on that raccoon. Jumped out at us. I joined in the laughter, the memory vivid in my mind. To be fair, it was a big raccoon, and Jake's scream was pretty impressive. We continued this for a while, trading stories and laughs. The tension of the past few years seemed to melt away. The warmth of shared history. It was nice, I thought, to reconnect like this, to remember that beneath the weathered exteriors developed, we were still those same kids at heart. But as we finished our lunch and prepared to continue our hike, I couldn't a growing sense of unease. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to deepen as the afternoon wore on, or the fact that we hadn't seen or heard any other hikers day. Or whatever it was, it left a knot in the pit of my stomach, a vague feeling that something wasn't quite right. I brushed it off as we resumed our trek, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many hours in front of a computer screen. The trail grew steeper as we continued, winding its way up the side of a ridge. The conversation dwindled as we focused on our footing. The only sounds were labored breathing and the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath our boots. It was Jake who pounded it out first, about an hour after lunch. We had paused to catch our breath at the top of a particularly steep section, and he cocked his head to one side, a puzzled expression on his face. "You guys hear that?" he asked. His voice hushed. Grant and I paused, listening. At first there was nothing unusual, just the wind in the trees, the gurgle of a nearby stream. But as the seconds ticked by, it became apparent. The woods had gone silent, with no birds singing, no insects buzzing, nothing. "Maybe a storm's coming," Grant suggested, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky that we could see through the canopy. Jake shook his head, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "Nah, I've been out here plenty of times. It's never been this quiet." I didn't say anything, but the knot in my stomach tightened. There was something oppressive about the silence, as if the very air had grown thick and heavy. I found myself straining my ears, trying to catch any sound, no matter how faint. But there was nothing, and brushed it off and kept walking. but the mood had changed. The easy camaraderie of earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet unease that seemed to grow with each step. Every crack of the branch underfoot, every rustle in the brush seemed amplified in the unnatural silence. We picked up the pace without discussing it. Each of us was pace. The trail led us deeper into the woods, the tree pressing in closer. Their branches seemed to reach out like gnarled fingers. As we rounded a bend, we saw it. At first it was just a shape, a dark mass laying across the path, about 50 yards ahead. But as we got closer, the details came into focus, and the reality of what we were seeing hit us like a physical blow. It was a deer, or at least what was left, tag of one. The carcass was torn apart, its innards strewn across the trail like some grotesque display. The forest floor was stained dark with blood, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of it. Jesus, Jake muttered, stepping back. What in hell did this? Grant knelt beside the remains, his face pale. A bear, maybe? He suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But I knew better. I'd seen bears take down. I didn't leave things like this. The deer looked as if it had been shredded. Its flesh was torn into ribbons, bones splintered and scattered. Whatever had done this wasn't interested in eating. It had killed for the sake of killing. Let's keep moving, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. I ought to be here if whatever did this comes back. The others nodded, and we pushed on, giving the carcass a wide berth. But the image stayed with us, burned into our minds, and the woods didn't let us forget. The further we went, the more we found bits of fur and gnawed bones, all scattered like some twisted breadcrumb trail. Then the noises started. Low, distant sounds like the groan of old trees in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was still oppressively so. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, impossible to pinpoint. It wasn't long before we were practically jogging down the trail. No one saying a word, just the sound of our boots crunching on the dirt and our ragged breathing. I could feel something watching us, an oppressive weight in the air pressing down on my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The trail began to descend, winding its way down into a valley. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. It should have been a relief to be heading downhill, but instead it felt like we were descending into some primordial darkness. And then we heard it. Something crashing through the underbrush, coming fast. The sound cut through the unnatural silence like a knife, galvanizing us into action. We broke into a run, the trail twisting and turning through the trees. The sounds behind us grew louder, closer. Whatever it was big and it was fast. Jake was in the lead, his long legs eating up the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Bert was just behind him, his face a mask of terror. I was bringing up the rear, my heart pounding in my ears, every muscle screaming for me to go faster. I could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear that was gnawing at my gut. We were being hunted, pursued by something that shouldn't exist, something that had no place in the rational world we thought we knew. Then just as quickly as it started, the noise stopped. We stumbled to a halt, panting, our eyes scanning the woods around us. The silence was back, thick and suffocating, and now it felt expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting.
Where did it go?
Grant whispered. I don't know, Jake replied, his eyes wide and darting from tree to tree. But I don't think we should stick around to find out. We started walking again, slower this time, every step careful and deliberate, that the sense of being hunted didn't leave us. It was like the woods themselves were watching, waiting for us to make a wrong move. We reached a small clearing, and that's when we saw it. A massive, hulking shape just beyond the tree line. At first I thought it was a bear, but then it stood up on two legs, towering over us. Its body was covered in matted fur, but its proportions were all wrong. Too long, too lean, with a head that was too big, like some grotesque caricature of a wolf. It let out a sound that froze my blood. A low rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. Jake screamed, and that was all it took. We turned and ran, sprinting through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I didn't know how long we ran, but it felt like hours. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for me to stop, but I didn't dare. I could hear the thing crashing through the woods behind us, gaining ground with every passing second. It was playing with us, I realized, with a sickening clarity. Like a cat plays with a mouse before the kill, we burst out of the woods onto a gravel road. And for a moment, I thought we were safe. But then I heard Grant cry out, and I turned just in time to see him go down, the creature on top of him, its jaws closing around his throat. Jake and I didn't stop. We couldn't. We just kept running. The sound of Grant's screams ringing in our ears. We reached the trailhead, and there, parked by the side of the road, was an old pickup truck. Jake yanked the door open, and we both piled in, slamming the doors behind us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, gravel spraying from the tires as we sped down the road. I didn't look back, I didn't have to. I could still hear it, that awful sound fading into the distance as we drove away. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town an hour later. Our nerves were frayed, our minds struggling to process what we'd seen. We told the sheriff everything about the hike, the unnatural silence, the creature, Grant's death. He looked at us like we were crazy, like we'd lost our minds out there in the woods. But when they went out to search the area, they found the remains. Grant was gone, but there was no denying what had happened. The sheriff never said much after that. Maybe he didn't want to believe it, or maybe he knew there was nothing he could do. The story spread through the town like wildfire, and the trail was closed off soon after. Jake and I never talked about it again. There was nothing left to say. We went our separate ways, each of us carrying the memory of that day like a scar. But scars don't disappear, and neither did that creature. In the evenings that followed, I tried to put that day behind me. I threw myself into my work, climbed the corporate ladder, and did everything I could to forget the horrors we'd witnessed in those West Virginia woods. But no matter how hard I tried, the memories always lingered just beneath the surface, ready to resurface in my nightmares. Jake didn't fare much better. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved out west, bouncing from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. It was as if he was constantly running, trying to outpace the shadows of our past. For a while, life went on. The world kept turning, oblivious to the darkness that lurked in those remote mountains. But then, 5 years after our encounter, the reports started coming in. It began with whispered stories from hikers and campers, tales of eerie silence in the woods, of feeling watched by unseen eyes. Then came the disappearances. At first it was just one or two people each year, easily explained away as tragic accidents or careless adventurers who'd ventured too far off the beaten path. But as time went on, the numbers grew. More and more people vanished without a trace. Their last known locations all circling around that same area where we'd encountered the creature. The authorities were baffled. Search parties came up empty-handed. Theories ranged from serial killers to wild animal attacks. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was out there still hunting. In 2005, 8 years after our encounter, I received a call from Jake. His voice was tight with fear, and I could hear the tremor in it as he spoke. "It's happening again," he said without preamble. "People are disappearing just like before." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How do you know?" "I've been keeping track," he replied. "News reports, missing persons bulletins. It's all centered around those mountains. We have to do something." I wanted to tell him he was crazy, that we should leave it alone, but I knew he was right. We were the only ones who knew the truth, who had seen the creature and lived to tell about it. We had a responsibility. "What do you want to do?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "We have to go back," Jake said, his voice grim with determination. "We have to end this." And so, against every instinct of self-preservation, we found ourselves arriving back at those god-forsaken mountains in the fall of We were older now, our bodies not as nimble, our reflexes not as sharp. But we were also wiser, more prepared. We brought weapons, hunting rifles, pistols, even a few homemade explosives that Jake had somehow acquired. It felt like we were gearing up for war, and in a way we were. We arrived at the trailhead on a cool October morning. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors. It was beautiful, in a haunting sort of way. As we shouldered our packs and checked our weapons one last time, I couldn't help but think of Grant, of the life he'd lost on this very trail. We owed it to him to see this through. The hike began much as it had 8 years ago, but this time we were hyper-aware of our surroundings. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf set us on edge. We moved slowly, cautiously, our eyes constantly scanning the woods around us. It was mid-afternoon when we reached the clearing where we'd first seen the creature. The area was overgrown now, nature reclaiming the space. But as we stood there, the memories came flooding back with vivid clarity. "Do you think it's still here?" Jake whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped his rifle. I was about to respond when we heard it, that same low rumbling growl that had haunted my nightmares for years. We spun around, weapons raised, to find ourselves face to face with the creature. It was even more terrifying than I remembered. Massive and misshapen, with matted fur and eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. It regarded us with what I could only describe as cruel amusement, as if it had been waiting for this moment. What followed was a battle that pushed us to the very limits of our endurance and sanity. We fought with everything we had. Bullets, explosives, and finally, when all else failed, with our bare hands. The woods echoed with gunshots and inhuman roars. In the end, it was Jake who dealt the killing blow. As the creature lunged for me, its jaws snapping inches from my face, Jake detonated the last of our explosives. The blast threw us all back, and when the smoke cleared, the creature lay still. We approached cautiously, hardly daring to believe it was over. The creature's body was a mess of matted fur and misshapen limbs, already beginning to decompose at an alarming rate. Within minutes it had crumbled to dust, leaving behind nothing but a faint, acrid smell. Jake and I stood there in stunned silence, our ears ringing from the explosion, our bodies battered and bruised. We had done it. We had killed the monster. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the memories of those we had lost and the horrors we'd endured. As we made our way back down the mountain, a heavy silence hung between us. We both knew that while the creature was gone, its legacy would live on in our memories, and in the lives of all those it had affected. We reported what had happened to the authorities. But, as expected, our story was met with skepticism. Without a body, without any tangible proof, we were just two traumatized men with a wild tale. The official report chalked up the disappearances to a combination of animal attacks and treacherous terrain. In the years that followed, Jake and I stayed in touch, bound by a shared experience that no one else could understand. We watched as the missing persons reports from the area gradually dwindled and stopped altogether. Life in the surrounding towns returned to normal, the events of the past fading into local legend. Not for us, the scars remained. We carried the weight of what we'd seen, what we'd done. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that inhuman growl ringing in my ears. And on those nights I find myself wondering, was it really over? Or are there more creatures out there, lurking in the dark corners of the world, waiting to be discovered? I may never know the answer, but one thing is certain. Never look at the wilderness the same way again. Because now I know that sometimes, when you venture into the deep woods, something ventures back with you. And some shadows, once seen, can never be unseen. When the wind rustles through the pine needles, it whispers secrets. Most people don't listen, but I've learned that silence and patience are as much a part of survival as food and shelter. My name is Raymond Devereaux, and I've been working as a park ranger in the depths of Michigan's Upper Peninsula for the past 3 years. It's a place so remote it feels like the edge of the earth, where the horizon is an endless sea of evergreen, and the night sky blazes with more stars than you'd ever imagine existed. Out here, solitude is your closest companion, and the wilderness holds tight to its mysteries. But that's exactly what I was looking for. I left my old life behind. Before this job, I was trapped in the suffocating confines of in Chicago. My days were a blur of fluorescent lights, endless meetings, and the constant ping of emails, demanding immediate attention. I remember my last day in that world vividly. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of day where the city skyscrapers seemed to swallow what little sunlight managed to break through the cloud cover. I was sitting in my cubicle, surrounded by the low hum of computer fans and the clacking of keyboards, when something inside me finally snapped. The project I'd been working on for months had just been scrapped without explanation, and my boss had the audacity to ask me to stay late to start on something new. In that moment, staring at the gray fabric walls of my cubicle, I felt like I was suffocating. I stood up, walked out, and never looked back. That night, as I sat in my overpriced studio apartment, I found myself scrolling through job listings, not for more seat positions, but for something anything that would take me far away from the crushing weight of city life. That's when I saw it, an opening for a park ranger position in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The listing warned of extreme isolation, harsh weather conditions, and minimal contact with the outside world. To most, this seemed daunting. To me, it sounded like parrot. Within a month, I had sold everything I owned, bought a sturdy pickup truck, and was on my way north. The drive up was like watching the world transform around me. The towering skyscrapers gave way to smaller towns, then to farmland, and finally to the dense primeval forests of the Upper Peninsula. My new home was a small cabin on the edge of a vast wilderness area. The park I now oversee isn't famous. You won't find its vistas on postcards, and tourists rarely stray this far north. But that's the way I like it. It's a place where nature reigns supreme, and the presence of man is but a faint echo. The first few months were an adjustment, to say the least. The silence was the hardest part. After years of constant noise, traffic, sirens, and the never-ending bustle of millions of people packed together, the quiet of the forest was almost deafening. At night, lying in bed, I could hear my own heartbeat. The sound seemed to echo off the log walls of my cabin, and slowly I began to adapt. I traded my suit for flannel and boots, my keyboard for an axe and compass. I learned to read the forest like I once read lines of code, understanding its patterns and rhythms. The changing of the seasons became my new project deadlines, each bringing its own set of challenges and rewards. Spring meant keeping an eye out for bears emerging from hibernation, their hunger making them bold and potentially dangerous. Summer brought the threat of wildfires, with every thunderstorm a potential catalyst for devastation. Fall was a flurry of activity, preparing for the long winter ahead. In winter was a test of endurance, with snowstorms that could last for days and temperatures that plummeted well below zero. Through it all, I found a peace I never knew in the city. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for years began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from truly knowing my surroundings and my place within them. My days now follow a rhythm as old as the forest itself. I wake with the sun. The first rays of dawn filter through the pine branches outside my window. Breakfast is simple, often just coffee and whatever I managed to catch or forage the day before. Then I don my ranger uniform, check my equipment, and head out into the wilderness. The typical duties of a ranger in a place like this are varied. I maintain trails, ensuring they remain passable and safe. I monitor the wildlife, keeping track of population numbers and watching for signs of disease or distress. Occasionally, I guide the rare visitor who loses their way, though such occurrences are few and far between in a place this remote. But mostly I watch. I listen. I've learned that the forest speaks, if you know how to hear it. The way the birds fall silent when a predator is near. The subtle changes in the air that herald an approaching storm. The tracks left in soft earth, telling stories of nocturnal dramas played out under the cover of darkness. It was on one such day of watching and listening that everything changed. A day that started like any other, but would end with me questioning everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that paints the world in sharp relief. The maples and birches were ablaze with color, their leaves a riot of red and gold against the deep green of the pines. I set out early, my breath frosting in the air as I made my way along the familiar trail. My goal that day was to check the boundary markers deep in the forest, in an area where the trees grow so close together that the sky above is reduced to thin slivers of light. It's a part of the park rarely visited, even by me. But it's important to maintain the markers to prevent hikers from straying onto private land. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was... The forest seemed quieter than usual, the typical morning chorus of birdsong noticeably absent. Even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, a constant background noise I'd grown accustomed to, was missing. I tried to shrug off the unease, attributing it to the changing season. Animals were preparing for winter, after all. Their behavior was bound to change. But as I pushed deeper into the forest, the feeling only grew stronger. It was then that I remembered the old, almost forgotten trail that wound through this section of the park. It had been closed for years due to frequent landslides, and few knew it even existed anymore. But I liked to walk it now and then to remind myself why it had been closed in the first place. On a whim, I decided to take a detour to check on the old trail. As I approached it, the silence of the forest seemed to deepen, as if the very air was holding its breath. And that's when I saw it, something that would change everything. A set of tracks leading off the path into the densest part of the forest. But these weren't any tracks I'd ever seen before. They were too large, too deep, and the spacing was all wrong, as if whatever made them had an odd loping gait. In all my years as a ranger, I'd seen plenty of bear and wolf tracks. I knew the print of every animal that called these woods home. But this was different. This was something I couldn't identify. Standing there, staring at those alien tracks, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. For the first time since I'd come to this place, I felt like a stranger in the forest. And I knew with a certainty that settled in my gut like a stone that I had to follow those tracks. Little did I know that decision would lead me into the heart of the mystery, darker and more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. A mystery that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and about my own place within it. As I set off to follow the tracks, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. And somewhere, deep in the shadows ahead, something waited. Something that didn't belong in this world, or any world I knew. The hunt was on. But was I the hunter or the hunted? Only time would tell. The tracks led me deeper into the forest, past gnarled trees that seemed to grow older and more twisted with each step. The underbrush thickened, grabbing at my clothes as if trying to hold me back. But I pressed on, my curiosity overriding the growing sense of dread in my gut. As I followed the trail, I began to notice other disturbing signs. Here and there I saw patches of fur caught on thorny bushes. Not the coarse brown fur of a bear or the gray of a wolf, but something different. A mottled, sickly-looking pelt that seemed to change color in the dappled forest light. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. It was an acrid alien smell that made my nose burn and my eyes water. I pulled my bandana up over my face, but it did little to block out the stench. That's when I found the first body. It was a deer, or at least what was left of one. Its rib cage had been torn open. The insides were hollowed out with precision that seemed almost surgical. I've seen predators take down prey before, but this wasn't the work of any bear or wolf. The flesh was flayed clean and the bones were picked with meticulous care. Whatever did this wasn't just hunting, it was something else entirely. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for the radio on my belt, but stopped myself. The nearest ranger station was over 20 miles away, and I knew how my voice would sound over the airwaves. Shaky, uncertain, like a man who had seen a ghost. Instead, I pulled out my camera and snapped a few pictures of the carcass. The unease in my gut grew stronger, but I pushed it aside. I had to find out what had made those tracks. The trail of blood led me further into the trees, past more signs of carnage, a rabbit here, a fox there, all ripped apart and left in the same eerie, meticulous fashion. It wasn't just the killing that was strange, it was the way the bodies were left, as if arranged deliberately, like some kind of grotesque offering. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trees began to thin out, and I found myself approaching a small clearing. The canopy opened up just enough to let in a bit of gray light, casting long shadows across the forest floor. And there, in the center of the clearing, was something I still can't fully explain. The creature, hunched and massive, crouched over another body. This time it wasn't an animal, it was human. The thing's back was to me, but I could see its silhouette clearly. Long limbs, almost too long, with joints that bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was covered in patches of that same matted fur I'd seen caught on the bushes, but not enough to be mistaken for any known animal. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creature's head jerked up and it turned slowly, as if sensing my presence. I had a brief glimpse of its face, and it's an image that will haunt me for the rest of my days. Its face was flat and elongated, with a mouth that seemed to stretch too wide. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They were intelligent, far too intelligent, and as they locked onto mine, I felt as if it could see right into my soul. For a moment we just stared at each other, neither moving. Then, almost in slow motion, I saw its muscles tense, preparing to spring. Instinct took over. I raised my rifle, a tool I carried more for show than anything else, and fired. The sound echoed through the trees, shattering the unnatural silence. The creature recoiled, letting out a sound that was neither animal nor human. It wasn't a roar or a scream, it was something worse, something that reverberated inside my skull and made my teeth ache. The thing leaped at me with the speed I couldn't match, its long limbs propelling it forward in a nightmarish sprint. I stumbled back, firing again and again, the shots wild and panicked. One of the bullets hit, and the creature let out another one of those terrible sounds before it dropped to the ground, twitching. I stood there shaking, My rifle still aimed at the thing as it lay on the ground. It didn't move. Slowly I approached, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The creature was dead, its body sprawled out in the clearing, the human body it had been feasting on lying forgotten beside it. With trembling hands, I knelt down to get a closer look at the creature. Its body was covered in scars, some fresh and others old, crisscrossing its limbs and torso. Its hands, or claws more accurately, were long and gnarled, with fingers that ended in sharp, black nails. But it was the mouth that disturbed me the most. It was lined with rows of teeth not unlike those of a shark, serrated and deadly, clearly built for tearing flesh apart. I moved to the human body next, my stomach churning. It was a man, his face unrecognizable, mutilated beyond recognition. His clothes were torn to shreds, but from the remnants, I could see that he had been wearing a jacket similar to the ones park rangers wore. There was an ID badge pinned to what was left of his shirt. I pulled it free, wiping away the blood to read the name. Joseph Langley. I knew Joseph. He had been a ranger here long before I arrived, but he went missing a few months after I started. No one knew what happened to him. Search parties had combed through these woods for days, but they found nothing. Until now. As I stood there, the reality of what I had discovered began to sink in. Joseph had just gone missing. He had been hunted, stalked by this creature, just like the animals I had seen along the way, and now I killed the thing that did it. I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to get back to the station to report what I had found. I took one last look at the creature's body, making sure it was truly dead, before I turned and started back through the forest. The walk back was a blur, my mind racing as I tried to process what had happened. When I finally reached the station, I collapsed into a chair, pulling out my phone to call for backup. As I waited, I scrolled through the pictures I had taken, my hand shaking. The carcass of the deer, the dismembered foxes, the creature, Joseph Langley's body. Everything was there. Undeniable proof of what I had seen. When the other rangers arrived, I led them back to the clearing. They didn't question me, didn't doubt my story, because there it all was, just as I had left it. The creature's body lying twisted in the dirt, the remains of Joseph Langley beside it. In the days that followed, the forest was swarming with people, rangers, police, scientists, all trying to make sense of what had happened. The creature's body was taken away for study, and I was questioned for hours about what I had seen. They told me it was some kind of unknown species, a mutant bear perhaps, or a wolf hybrid gone wrong. But I knew better. The intelligence in those eyes, the precision of its kills. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. As the weeks passed, life in the park slowly returned to normal, but for me, everything had changed. The forest I once found solace in now felt alien and threatening. Every rustle in the bushes, every shadow in the trees made me jump. I found myself wondering if there were more of those creatures out there hiding in the depths of the wilderness. I considered leaving, going back to the city and the life I had left behind. But something kept me here. A sense of responsibility, perhaps, or a need to understand what had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that there were more secrets hidden in these woods. So I stayed, watching and waiting. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through pine needles, I listen more closely than ever before, because now I know that sometimes the forest's secrets are better left unheard. But I'll be here, standing guard on the edge of civilization, ready to face whatever emerges from the shadows. Because someone has to know what's out there lurking in the dark heart of the wilderness. And as I sit here writing this account, I can't help but wonder, if such a creature could exist, hidden for so long in these familiar woods, What else might be out there? What other horrors might be waiting just beyond the reach of our understanding? The thought keeps me awake at night, staring out into the darkness. And in those moments, I realize that the true horror isn't just what I found in those woods. It's the possibility of what else might be out there waiting to be discovered. So, I'll keep watching, I'll keep listening, and I'll be ready. Because in this vast wilderness, where the line between the known and the unknown blurs, someone needs to stand guard. That someone is me. I'm a Devereaux, park ranger, protector of the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond. As I look out my window into the gathering dusk, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there in the deepening shadows of the forest, something is looking back.